Right now, as you hear my voice, you may feel tired, in a way that sleep has not been able to cure. Not merely weary in the body, but worn in the heart. You may feel as though you have been carrying something for so long that you no longer remember what it is like to put it down. Perhaps it is the weight of bills that arrive with an unfailing regularity. Perhaps it is the quiet dread of tomorrow, the uncertain feeling of what the next week, the next month, the next season will demand of you. Perhaps it is that inward sense of strain that comes when you have tried so hard to make life work, and yet life still seems to resist you. You may feel as though you are always just behind, always catching up, always pushing against a door that will not open. You may have told yourself more than once that you only need one good break, one shift, one moment when the tide turns. And you may have waited for that moment with a patience that has begun to feel like sorrow. You may have watched others move ahead while you remained seemingly fixed in place. And though you smile, though you carry yourself as best you can, there is something within you that whispers, "Why does nothing truly work for me? Why does it always feel as though the world moves for others, but not for me?" If that is you, then listen gently. Do not brace yourself. Do not tighten your mind in argument, for I am not here to dispute with you. I am here to speak to you as one human being to another, as one who has known discouragement and strain, and who has also known the strange, quiet moment when everything begins to change, not by noise, not by struggle, not by frantic effort, but by a simple inward shift so subtle that you might miss it if you were not listening. There are those who hear a promise and immediately protect themselves from it. They have been disappointed too often. They have hoped too many times. And so when someone speaks of change, the mind rises like a guard at the gate and says, "Do not believe. Do not be fooled again." If you have that guard within you, do not fight it. Let it stand there. Let it listen as well. I am not asking you to throw away your reason. I am asking you to allow yourself for a little while to consider an idea that may sound too simple at first, and yet has altered the lives of countless men and women who dared to test it. You may have tried, truly tried, not half-heartedly, not carelessly, but with sincerity. You may have worked harder, taken on more responsibility, carried more than your share. You may have sought counsel, read books, listened to lectures, spoken prayers into the night. You may have whispered your desires to God with a mixture of hope and desperation. You may have promised yourself that tomorrow you will begin again. And yet when tomorrow arrives, the same burdens meet you at the door. The same obstacles present themselves. The same old story seems to continue, as though life has decided that your place is to struggle while others prosper. Perhaps you have even attempted what people call positive thinking. You tried to keep your spirits up, you tried to speak kindly about your future, you tried to imagine a better day. But then an unpaid bill arrived, or an unexpected expense, or a hard word from someone, or a quiet disappointment that no one else noticed, and your mind fell back into its familiar posture. You found yourself saying, "It is always like this. Nothing ever really changes." I know that posture. I know it, not from theory, but from life. And I tell you, with all the tenderness I can summon, that the reason so many people fail is not because they lack desire, nor because they lack intelligence, nor because they are unworthy of abundance. They fail because they are faithful to the wrong state. They are loyal to the identity they have worn for so long that it feels like their skin. They go through the day trying to change circumstances, but they lie down at night as the same old self, and they rise in the morning to meet the same old world. And so you have tried to force the day to be different, while the night remained the same. You have tried to alter the outer world with effort, while the inner world, especially the hidden inner world that you enter as you drift into sleep, continued to tell the same story. Now I will not ask you to perform some great act of will. I will not ask you to wrestle with your thoughts all day long until you are exhausted. I will not ask you to pretend that what you see is not what you see. I will not ask you to deny your senses. I will ask you for something far simpler and far more powerful. I will ask you to consider that the most decisive moments of your life happen when your eyes are closed. But before I say more, let me speak plainly, so there is no misunderstanding. If you are listening to me now, you may feel as though you are at the end of your patience. You may feel as though you have no more strength to try another method, another plan, another hopeful idea, and you may be right. You may not have more strength to fight, yet what I am going to speak of does not require fighting. It requires surrender. Not surrender to defeat, but surrender to a new identity. Tonight is not about struggling for a better life. Tonight is about letting go of the one who has struggled. I want you to hear that carefully. There is a way of approaching life that is very common and it seems sensible on the surface. A man says, "When things improve, I will feel peaceful." A woman says, "When money comes, I will finally breathe." They imagine that peace and ease and confidence are rewards granted after circumstances change. And so they wait. They postpone their freedom. They postpone their joy. They postpone their dignity. They postpone their rest. They say, "One day, when this is solved, I will be okay." And because they postpone it, they live their days in a state of not being okay. They live their days in the feeling that something is missing, that something is delayed, that life has not yet begun, and that feeling becomes their constant companion. It becomes the air they breathe. It becomes the story they carry into the night. They fall asleep in it, they wake in it, and life, which is obedient to the state you occupy, must continue to reflect it. You may not have realized how faithful you have been to your own disappointment, not because you wanted to be, but because it became habitual. You may have carried a quiet expectancy of failure for so long that you now call it realism. You may have learned to protect yourself by expecting less, so you will not be hurt. And that self-protection has become the very pattern that repeats in your life. So I tell you, gently and without accusation, that the change you long for will not begin when you finally get the right opportunity. It will not begin when you finally meet the right person. It will not begin when you finally find the perfect plan. The change begins when you stop going to sleep as the one who is waiting. Now perhaps you are thinking, "Neville, what can sleep do? Sleep is just rest. Sleep is an escape. Sleep is where I stop thinking." But I tell you, sleep is not merely rest. Sleep is not merely escape. Sleep is the door through which the deeper self enters. Sleep is the place where your most honest assumptions are impressed upon the subconscious, and the subconscious, faithful, unquestioning, and immensely powerful, takes those assumptions as instruction. You may not believe that yet, and I will not demand that you believe it as a doctrine. I only ask you to listen as one who is willing to be surprised. There was a time in my life when I too felt that nothing was working. I do not mean that nothing was happening at all. I mean that life felt stubborn, as though I were always pushing against it. I could feel within me a hunger for freedom, for stability, for ease, and yet the outer world seemed to answer me with delay. And I tried as many do. I tried to reason my way into better days. I tried to plan. I tried to strain. I tried to earn my peace by effort. But the more I tried, the more I discovered that effort without inner change becomes a sort of prison. You become a laborer of your own mind, always working, always striving, never arriving. Then one night, quietly, without drama, something shifted. I did not know at the time that it would be the beginning of a new life. It did not arrive with trumpets. It did not announce itself. It came as a simple recognition, a small inward discovery. I saw, with a clarity that startled me, that the day had been demanding so much of me because I had been demanding from the day what can only be received from within. And I realized this. Things did not change because I tried harder. They changed because I slept differently. You may have heard many people say, "Work harder." You may have been taught that life is conquered by force. You may have been told that only struggle brings reward, and there is a place for honest labor, yes. But I am speaking of something deeper than labor. I am speaking of the hidden cause behind the visible effect. The outer world, as you experience it, is not the cause. It is the result. It is the shadow cast by an inner light. And the most unguarded moment, the moment when the mind is no longer arguing, no longer defending, no longer rehearsing, comes as you drift into sleep. You see, there is a strange mercy in the approach of sleep. Sleep loosens the grip of the conscious mind. Sleep softens the hard edges of reason. Sleep quiets the chatter that says, be careful, do not believe, do not expect too much. Remember what happened last time. Sleep is like a gentle hand that comes and lowers the barrier. And in that quiet lowering, something can enter you that could not enter you in the bright noise of the day. Now, I am not going to speak to you tonight about complicated practices. I am not going to burden you with instructions. I am not going to ask you to count breaths or repeat formulas for hours. I am going to share with you something so simple that the proud mind may dismiss it, and yet so powerful that the humble heart will recognize it as truth. I discovered that if I allowed the right idea to enter me as I slept, life began to rearrange itself in the most natural way, not as a miracle performed against nature, but as nature obeying a higher law of consciousness. And I say to you now, in the same quiet certainty, things finally started working for me when I heard this while I slept. Not when I heard it as a mere sound, but when I heard it as an inner acceptance. When it passed beyond the ears and entered the deeper chamber of feeling. When it became a fact within me rather than a hope outside me. You may say, but Neville, I have heard many things. I have listened to many words. I have been inspired. And then the inspiration faded. Yes, that is common. For inspiration alone does not change the state. You can be moved for a moment and remain the same person. You can feel hope for an hour and go to bed as the one who doubts. And if you go to bed as the one who doubts, the subconscious receives doubt, not hope. Tonight, I am not interested in moving you for a moment. I am interested in changing the one who goes to sleep, because the one who goes to sleep determines the one who wakes. Now let us be honest together. There is a certain kind of exhaustion that is not cured by rest, because it is the exhaustion of waiting, waiting for life to begin, waiting for the problem to resolve, waiting for the money to come, waiting for the fear to leave, waiting for someone to finally treat you differently, waiting for your own heart to feel safe, waiting for the world to be kinder. Waiting is a form of bondage. It is the posture of the one who believes that the power is outside. And the strange thing is this: a man can wait in a fine house or a poor one. A woman can wait with a full table or an empty one. Waiting is not determined by circumstances. It is determined by state. It is an inner stance, and it can end in a single night. Not because you force the world to change overnight, but because you cease to be the one who waits. So I will speak to you now, as though you are seated beside me, and I am speaking not to a crowd, but to you alone. If you have felt that nothing works for you, if you have felt that life responds to others and not to you, if you have felt that you are always the one who must struggle while others glide, then I want you to hear this as intimately as possible. It is not that you are cursed. It is not that you are forgotten. It is not that you are unlucky. It is not that your efforts are meaningless. It is that you have been living from a state that cannot produce the results you desire. And you have been living from that state because it is familiar. A man returns to what is familiar, even when it is painful. A woman returns to what is familiar, even when it is limiting. Familiarity feels like safety, even when it is bondage. And so we cling to the old identity, not because we love it, but because we know it. Tonight, we are going to loosen that grip, not by violence, not by force, but by a gentle change of inner hearing. There is an inner ear deeper than the physical ear. It is the ear of the heart. It is the ear of the subconscious. It hears feeling. It hears assumption. It hears identity. It does not care what you say in a moment of excitement. It cares what you accept as true when you are quiet. That is why I say that the night is so important. Not because the night is magical, but because the night is unguarded. During the day, you may try to believe you are free, And then you look at your purse, you look at your account, you look at your calendar, you look at the faces around you, and you feel the old tightening return. You say, I am not free. You may not say it with your lips, but you say it with your feeling, and the subconscious obeys feeling. But at night, as the world fades and the senses withdraw, you can enter a different feeling. You can accept a new identity. You can hear a sentence inwardly and let it become your secret truth. And that secret truth, once accepted, begins to objectify itself in the most natural way. People will call it chance. They will call it fortune. They will call it coincidence. They will say, how did that happen? And you will smile, not because you can explain every bridge of incidents, but because you will know where it began. It began in the night. It began when you slept as one who is already supported. It began when you fell asleep, hearing the right thing, not as sound, but as self. Now perhaps you fear disappointment. Perhaps you have been let down too many times. Perhaps your mind wants to say, do not expect too much. Listen, I will not insult you with false promises. I will not tell you that you will wake tomorrow with gold in your hands. I will not tell you that the world will suddenly confess its love for you in the morning. But I will tell you something that I know from experience, and from the experience of those who have tested this law with sincerity. If you change what you accept as true of yourself in the silence of sleep, your world must begin to change. It may begin in small ways at first, almost imperceptibly. It may begin as a change in the way you feel when you wake, a quiet ease, a strange calm, a sense that the burden has lifted even before the evidence appears. And that inner change is the true beginning. For when the state changes, the world follows. But if you keep waiting for the world to change before you allow the state to change, you will wait a long time. So tonight we reverse the order. Tonight you allow the inner change first. Tonight you grant yourself the feeling of things working for you, before the world can prove it. Tonight you let life respond to your new assumption instead of your old complaint. You may not realize how much of your life has been shaped by the simple inward sentence, "It never works for me." That sentence, when accepted, is a command. It is not a description, it is a decree. And the world, being faithful, will find ways to justify it. A door closes, and you say, "See, it never works." A plan fails, and you say, see, it never works." A person disappoints you, and you say, see, it never works." And with every repetition, you strengthen the state. You are not merely observing life, you are instructing it. Tonight we withdraw that instruction. Tonight we replace it with a new one, so gentle, so natural, that it can enter even the most tired soul. Things work for me. Life supports me. I am guided. I am provided for. You may feel a little resistance as you hear those sentences. That is natural. The old state does not want to die. It has lived in you for a long time. But you do not need to fight resistance. You do not need to argue with it. You do not need to conquer it. You only need to let something new enter you quietly, the way dawn enters a room without forcing the darkness. When I say, things finally started working for me, I do not mean that life became perfect. I mean that the pattern changed, the tide turned, the sense of being against the world softened into the sense of being carried by life. The feeling of always pushing became the feeling of being led. The feeling of being shut out became the feeling of being welcomed. And I tell you, it began not by effort, but by what I allowed myself to hear as I slept. Now I will not instruct you yet. I will not burden you with the how, for the how belongs later. Tonight, at this beginning, I want only to prepare your heart for the possibility that your life is not fixed, and that your struggles are not your identity. They are only the reflection of a state, and a state can be changed. So let me ask you, quietly, without pressure, what would it feel like if things began to work for you? Not as a sudden thrilling excitement, but as a deep relief. What would it feel like to wake without dread? What would it feel like to move through your day with a calm certainty that you are not alone, that you are not fighting, that you are not forgotten? Perhaps you have forgotten what that would feel like. Perhaps you have lived in strain for so long that ease feels foreign. But it is not foreign. It is your natural inheritance. It is simply a state you have not worn in a long time. Tonight we begin to wear it again. And we begin gently, so gently that the conscious mind does not resist, so gently that the tired heart can accept it, so gently that you might almost think nothing is happening, until you notice, days later, that the world is responding differently, and you cannot quite explain why. You will explain it if you remember this: things did not change because you tried harder. They changed because you slept differently. For there is a secret that most people never consider. The last mood you carry into sleep is the first mood you wake into life. The final feeling before sleep is the seed of tomorrow's experience. The mind may chatter all day, but the subconscious listens most deeply when the senses are quiet. And because it listens then, your night becomes your future. So I am speaking to you now, not as a lecturer standing above you, but as a friend standing beside you, telling you what I wish someone had told me in my own weary years. You do not need to force life. You need to change the one who enters sleep. You do not need to chase signs. You need to become the sign. You do not need to beg the world to work for you. You need to accept, inwardly, that it already does. You may say, "But Neville, that sounds like self-deception." No, it is self-selection. It is choosing the state you will wear. The world will always mirror what you wear. If you wear strain, it mirrors strain. If you wear ease, it mirrors ease. If you wear the identity of the one for whom things never work, it will provide endless evidence. If you wear the identity of the one for whom things work, it must find ways, even through unexpected channels, to confirm it. Tonight, at the very beginning, I want only to plant this idea in you as a quiet possibility. What if the reason your life has felt stuck is not that you are incapable, but that you have been listening to the wrong inner sentence as you drifted into sleep? What if you have been carrying into the night, again and again, the same hidden confession: "It is hard, it does not work. I am behind. I am not safe." And what if, simply by hearing something else, by accepting something else, your pattern could change? That is all. That is the beginning. You may not yet know the words. You may not yet know the feeling. You may not yet know how to enter that quiet, receptive state. Do not worry about any of it. In this first part, I only want you to stay near me. I want you to remain with my voice long enough that the old story begins to loosen. Because the old story is the true burden. Not the bills, not the work, not the tasks. Those are only events. The story is what makes them heavy. The story is what makes them permanent. The story is what makes them repeat. And tonight we are going to change the story at its root, not by shouting over it, but by whispering something truer into the mind that creates. So let my voice now become for you what a gentle lamp is in a dark room. It does not fight the darkness. It simply shines. It reveals. It comforts. It changes the atmosphere by its quiet presence. Stay with me. If you feel tired, let yourself be tired. If you feel doubtful, let yourself be doubtful. If you feel as though you have heard promises before, let that be so. I am not here to demand your faith. I am here to invite your experiment. And I tell you, from my own experience, that one sincere experiment is worth more than years of hoping without understanding. Things finally started working for me when I heard this while I slept. Not because the words were magical, but because the acceptance was. And if you will allow it, tonight can be the night you stop carrying the old identity into the darkness. Tonight can be the night you stop rehearsing the same failures before sleep. Tonight can be the night you stop entering the womb of creation with the seed of worry in your hands. Tonight can be the night you begin to hear something else. And if you hear it deeply enough, if you accept it just enough, then in the days that follow, you will begin to notice something strange. Small things will begin to align. The right conversation will appear. A delay will dissolve. A door that always seemed closed will open without struggle. A burden will lift in a way you did not plan. and you will not be able to trace every step, but you will know, inwardly, that it began here. It began when you stopped trying to fix the day, and you allowed the night to remake you. So stay, for we are only at the beginning, and I have much to share, quietly, gently, as one who has walked this road, and found that the true turning point was never in the marketplace, never in the crowded streets, never in the opinions of others. It was in the stillness. It was in the unseen. It was in the moment the eyes grew heavy. It was in what I allowed myself to hear. And what you allow yourself to hear tonight will determine what you will call your life tomorrow. There was a season in my own life when, if you had asked me whether things could truly turn in a man's favor, I might have answered with a tired smile and a careful silence, not because I wished to be bitter, but because my days were full of that particular kind of discouragement that comes when you have done all you know to do, and still life seems unmoved by your effort. I was younger then. I had come to New York with ambition and with a certain fire in me, but ambition does not pay the rent, and fire does not always warm a room. New York is a city that can lift a man and crush him with the very same streets. It can promise you everything with its lights, and then remind you each evening how little you have in your pocket. I remember rooms so small that the bed seemed to fill them entirely. A narrow bed, a chair, a washstand, perhaps a small table if one was fortunate, and thin walls that allowed you to hear the life of others as though it were your own. Footsteps in the corridor, a door closing somewhere, voices muffled and then clear again, the sound of water in pipes, and the city always humming beyond the window, like a restless animal that never truly sleeps. There is a particular feeling that comes with small rooms when the mind is large. Your thoughts have space, but your life seems cramped. You sit, and you plan, and you hope. And then you look at the plain walls and the worn floor, and you wonder how a man crosses the distance between what he knows within and what he sees without. In those days, I was not living in ease. I was living in uncertainty. I did not know, from one week to the next, what work would come, what money would appear, how the simplest obligations would be met. And when one lives in that kind of uncertainty long enough, it begins to enter the bones. You do not merely worry with the mind, you worry with the body. You wake and your chest is already tight. You walk and you carry an invisible weight. You lie down at night and you feel as though you have been wrestling with the day, and the day has won. And I tried. I tried in the way sincere people try. I did not sit idly and wait for charity. I worked. I practiced. I took what work I could. I pushed myself to be noticed. I made plans. I spoke to people. I searched for openings. I told myself that if I simply exerted enough effort, life would eventually yield. But it seemed again and again that nothing would yield. The smallest things became trials. A small expense that another man would not notice could upset my whole week. A delayed payment could throw everything into confusion. A promise from someone could lift my heart and then be forgotten, and I would have to swallow the disappointment quietly, pretending that I had not hoped too much. And the worst part was not the lack of money itself. It was the feeling that I had no ground under me. It was the sense that I was always exposed, always one step away from embarrassment, always having to calculate and reconsider and restrain myself. There is a certain humiliation in that, not because poverty is shameful, but because a man's spirit knows when it is being forced to live beneath its natural level. So I began to feel something that I did not speak aloud, but I felt it often. Nothing seems to work, no matter how hard I try. I have heard that sentence in countless hearts since then, though they may dress it in different words. Some say, I am unlucky. Some say, life is against me. Some say, it is always difficult, but the feeling is the same. It is the feeling of pushing against a door that will not open. It is the feeling of being faithful to effort and receiving little in return. And because I felt that way, I began to look outward for causes. I blamed the times. I blamed the city. I blamed the competition. I blamed circumstance. I blamed the fact that I was far from my home. I blamed the way the world was arranged, believing that power belonged to others, and that I must somehow persuade them to grant me a better life. This is how most men live. They believe life is outside of them. They believe they must bargain with it, impress it, outwit it, endure it. And they carry this belief like a chain, so familiar that they do not even recognize the weight. I did not recognize it either, not at first. And yet, even in those difficult years, there was something in me that would not fully surrender. I could feel, beneath the discouragement, a strange insistence, a quiet voice that said, there must be something more. There must be a law. There must be a way. It was not pride. It was not arrogance. It was more like remembrance, as though my own being knew that it was not made to live as a leaf blown by the winds of circumstance. Still, knowing that there must be a way is not the same as knowing the way, so I wandered, as many do, between hope and disappointment. I would feel lifted for a day, then brought down again by some outward fact. I would hear of another man's success and feel inspired, and then I would return to my own room, my own narrow bed, my own unanswered questions. It was during this time that I encountered Abdullah. I do not speak of him to decorate my story. I speak of him because for me, he was the turning point, not because he performed some show of power, not because he impressed me with strange wonders, but because he spoke with an authority that did not argue. He spoke as one who knew. I had been introduced to ideas before. Many people speak of religion. Many people speak of God. Many people speak of prayer. But most speak as though they are describing something far away, something above them, something outside. They speak as though the divine were a distant ruler, and man a helpless subject begging for favors. Abdullah did not speak that way. He spoke as though the divine were within the man listening. He spoke as though imagination were not a pastime, but the very power that shapes reality. He spoke as though the world I saw with my eyes were not the cause of my life, but the effect of something unseen. And the first time he spoke that truth plainly, it struck me with both hope and resistance. Hope, because I had long felt that there must be a law. Resistance, because everything I had ever been taught insisted that the world is solid and fixed, and that a man must accept his portion. I can still hear his tone in my memory. It was calm, almost severe, yet not unkind. He did not flatter me. He did not soothe my doubts. He did not attempt to persuade me gently. He stated his premise as fact. Imagination is the only reality. Now, if you have never been truly desperate, you may not understand what that sentence does to the heart. When a man is comfortable, he can entertain ideas as curiosities. He can discuss them, debate them, place them on a shelf with other pleasant thoughts. But when a man is pressed by life, when he feels the hard edge of necessity, then an idea is not merely an idea. It is either a door or a wall. And when I heard, imagination is the only reality, something in me wanted it to be the door. But my mind argued. My mind said, if imagination is reality, why is my life so narrow? Why do I not imagine myself wealthy and become so at once? Why do I still lie in this small room? Why do I still feel uncertain? My mind wanted proof before acceptance, and that, I later learned, is the very nature of the trap. The mind, trained by the senses, demands evidence before it will believe, but the law of consciousness is the opposite. You must assume, and then evidence follows. You must accept within, and then life reflects without. At that time, I did not yet understand this reversal, though I was being invited into it. So I resisted, not openly perhaps, but inwardly. I would listen to him, and then I would return to my room, and the city would surround me again, and the facts of my life would rise like a chorus saying, be reasonable. This is your reality. These are your limits. And I felt torn, as many feel when they first encounter this teaching. Part of me longed to believe it entirely. Another part of me was afraid to believe it, because belief would require responsibility. If imagination truly creates, then I could no longer blame the city or the times or other people. I would have to look at my own inner state as the source. That can be frightening. It is easier to say, life is cruel, than to say, my own assumptions have shaped this. For the first makes you a victim, and the second makes you an operant power. And though being an operant power is freedom, it is also responsibility. So fear rose in me, not of the teaching itself, but of what it implied. If this is true, then I must change within, and if I must change within, then I must let the old self die. The old self, the one who felt that nothing worked. The old self, the one who rehearsed struggle. The old self, the one who looked outward and waited. And the old self does not surrender easily, for he has lived in you for years. So I went back and forth. There were days when I felt uplifted by what I had heard. I would walk the streets with a strange sense of possibility. I would say to myself, perhaps the world is not as fixed as it seems. Perhaps there is a secret at work. But then the practical matters would return. A bill, a lack of work, a disappointment. And my mind would say, there you see, it is not true. You are only comforting yourself. This is the struggle most people face. Not a lack of desire, but an inner division. They want to believe, but they also want to remain loyal to appearances. They want to enter a new state, but they fear leaving the old one. They want the new life, but they continue to sleep as the old self. And I was no different. I remember one particular evening. I had walked a long distance that day. I had met with someone about work, and the meeting had not gone as I hoped. It was not dramatic. It was simply another small closing of a door. And when enough doors close, the heart begins to brace itself against hope. I returned to my room, and the city outside the window seemed indifferent, as cities often do. The light in the room was dim. The bed waited. And I remember feeling, as I sat down, that familiar thought again, nothing works. And then, almost at once, another thought followed, not from my habit, but from what I had heard. What if that thought is the very cause? That question startled me. It was simple, and yet it was like a hand turning my face toward a mirror. For I saw, in that moment, that I had been living from that sentence. I had been carrying it like a secret prayer. I had been repeating it with feeling. Nothing works. And if imagination is reality, and feeling is the secret, then I had been planting the seed of failure again and again. Not because I wanted failure, but because it was familiar. Now when a man sees something like that, he can either feel condemned or he can feel liberated. At first, I felt both. Condemned, because it suggested that my suffering had been prolonged by my own state. Liberated, because it suggested that if my state had created it, then my state could also change it. That night, I thought of Abdullah again. I thought of the way he spoke, without trembling, without doubt. Imagination is the only reality. And for the first time, I did not receive it as an interesting sentence. I received it as a challenge. Not a harsh challenge, but a sincere one. If this is true, I must prove it. And here my logic rose again. My mind said, how do you prove such a thing? What do you do? What action is required? But Abdullah had made it plain. The action is imaginal. The change is internal. The assumption must be taken on as fact, not argued, not debated, not wished for, but assumed. And I felt, at that time, quite unprepared. My life seemed too tight. My mind seemed too restless. My doubts seemed too strong. So I did what many do. I tried to understand it intellectually. I turned it over in my mind. I reasoned about it. I thought, if imagination is reality, then perhaps I must imagine something different. And yet, even as I thought it, I would hear the city, I would feel the small room, I would remember the day's disappointment, and I would slip back into the old feeling. It was like trying to carry water in hands that kept opening. And then I learned another truth, one that I did not learn from books, but from experience, that the mind is not most pliable when it is in full daylight. The mind becomes pliable when it grows quiet, when the body is relaxed, when the senses withdraw, when the day has loosened its grip. when you are drifting towards sleep. In those moments, the mind is like softened clay. It can receive a new impression, and the impression it receives then becomes the shape of tomorrow. I did not know all that in those words at the time, but I felt instinctively that there was something about the approach of sleep that made it possible to accept what I could not accept while fully awake. So in those early years, my nights became my laboratory. I would lie down upon that narrow bed and listen to the sounds outside, and I would ask myself, what am I accepting as true as I fall asleep? At first, I discovered that I was accepting worry. I was accepting lack. I was accepting delay. I was accepting the feeling that life was hard and that I was behind. No wonder then that the mornings reflected the same. This realization did not come all at once as a single bright revelation. It came gradually, like a dawn spreading across the mind. I began to see the pattern. I began to see how my inner state, especially at night, was my true creative act. Yet I still resisted. I still felt that tug of logic. Logic said, you cannot pay rent with imagination. Fear said, do not hope too much. Habit said, this is how it has always been. But beneath all three, something quieter said, test it, and I did. Not perfectly at first, not with some grand confidence. I tested it the way a man tests a bridge. He does not fully trust, he steps carefully. He listens for creaks. He expects it may not hold. And yet, step by step, he discovers that it does. I remember the first time I attempted to assume a new state before sleep. It was awkward. My mind wandered. I felt foolish. I would imagine something, and then the old thought would rise. But it is not true. And then, because I had been with Abdullah, another sentence came to answer it. You do not imagine what you will be, you imagine what you are. That struck me, for it revealed the difference between wishing and assuming. Wishing places the desire in the future and keeps you as you are. Assuming places you in the end and makes the desire present. And the subconscious accepts the present as reality. But it takes courage to assume. Not courage in the dramatic sense, but the quiet courage to feel something that contradicts appearances. The courage to stop asking permission from the world. The courage to stop waiting. And I, like you, had to build that courage. So I continued to listen to Abdullah. I listened and I argued inwardly. And I returned again, because something in me knew that this was not a pleasant philosophy, but a law. And because it was a law, it could be proven. Abdullah did not allow me to remain half committed. That was his strength. He did not comfort my doubt. He challenged it. Yet the challenge was not cruel. It was, in its own way, compassionate, because he refused to let me stay small. I recall speaking to him once of my circumstances, explaining, as men do, why things were difficult. I spoke of money, I spoke of work, I spoke of the uncertainty. And he listened. And then he said, in effect, you are confessing your state. Change your confession. Now that is not what the tired mind wants to hear. The tired mind wants sympathy. It wants someone to agree that life is hard. It wants someone to say, yes, you have been treated unfairly, and perhaps you have. But agreement with the old state is agreement with the old life. So he gave me something more valuable than sympathy. He gave me a mirror, and in that mirror I saw the very thing I had to change. I had to change the inner sentence. Nothing works for me. I had to become the one for whom things work. And at that time, I did not yet know how natural that state could become. I did not yet know that once you occupy it, the world begins to arrange itself around you in ways you could never have planned. I did not yet know that doors open without strain, and that opportunities arise as though they had been waiting for you to arrive in the right state. I did not know that yet. All I knew was that I was being asked to accept a truth that my senses denied, and that is where most people falter. They say, I will accept it when I see it. But the law says, you will see it when you accept it. So my struggle in those years was not only with money or work. It was with that reversal. My old training wanted outer proof. The new teaching required inner assumption first. And because I was human, I resisted. I doubted. I feared I would be disappointed again. I feared I would try and fail and then feel even more foolish. Perhaps you know that fear. It is the fear of hope. And yet, I continued, because something in me preferred the risk of hope to the certainty of despair. So I began, night after night, to watch my inner life, to notice the moods I carried, to see how quickly I fell into the old confession, to realize how often I repeated silently, "It is hard." And each time I noticed it, I began to ask, what would I say? What would I feel if things were working for me? Not someday. Now, if things were working for me, I would feel carried. If things were working for me, I would feel calm. If things were working for me, I would feel supported. If things were working for me, I would not tighten my heart at every small expense. If things were working for me, I would not brace myself for disappointment. And I began to taste that feeling in small moments. At first only for a breath, a slight easing, a softening in the chest, a quiet release. It was not dramatic. It was like loosening a knot that had been tied for years. And then gradually, I began to realize something that may help you deeply. The state you have lived in for years feels like you, but it is not you. It is only a garment you have worn, and a garment can be changed. When I say I had years of struggle, I do not mean I had years of failure with no hope. I mean I had years of being trained by life to see the outer world as cause, and the greatest struggle was untraining myself from that belief. It is one thing to say, imagination is the only reality. It is another thing to live as though it were true when you have an unpaid bill in your hand. It is one thing to speak of consciousness as the creator. It is another thing to go to sleep, feeling secure when your senses say you are not. And yet, that is exactly where the law must be proven. Not in comfort, but in contradiction. Not when it is easy, but when it challenges you. So my story, my confession, is not that I was always confident. I was not. My confession is that I was divided, and tired, and uncertain, and yet I persisted. I returned to the idea again and again, until it began to become more than words. And the way it became more than words was simple. I began to listen differently, not only with my ears in the day, but with my feeling in the night. For I began to sense, even before I could explain it, that the night was the place where the struggle could end. The night was the place where the old self loosened. The night was the place where a new identity could enter. And that is why I speak to you now as I do. Because when I tell you that things began to work for me when I heard something while I slept, I am not offering a clever phrase. I am confessing the moment when my life began to obey a different inner command. But before that obedience appeared outwardly, I had to face myself inwardly. I had to face my doubt. I had to face my logic. I had to face my fear. And I had to see that all three were simply guardians of an old state. Doubt was not my enemy. Doubt was my habit. Logic was not my enemy. Logic was my training. Fear was not my enemy. Fear was my memory. And memory can be revised. Training can be replaced. Habit can be changed. So if you feel identified with my struggle, if you recognize yourself in these small rooms and uncertain days, then let that recognition comfort you. Not because we celebrate struggle, but because your struggle does not disqualify you. It proves you are human, and the law works for human beings, not for saints upon pedestals. I did not come to this teaching as a man who had everything. I came to it as a man who needed it. I came to it as a man who had tried and failed and tried again. I came to it as a man who had whispered, "Nothing works." And because I came that way, I can speak to you who may feel the same. Now I will tell you something else, very softly. The moment you hear the idea that imagination is the only reality, you may feel a strange mixture. Hope, yes, but also grief. For you begin to realize how many years you have lived under a false belief. You begin to realize how long you have waited for the world to grant you what you could have assumed within. Do not be harsh with yourself. You did not know. you were taught otherwise. You were trained to worship appearances. You were trained to call facts final. But facts are not final. They are the shadows of states, and a shadow cannot remain when the light changes. So if you have lived in the shadow of nothing works, you are not condemned. You are simply invited to change the light, that is all. And it begins as it began for me, with an introduction to the idea that the creative power is not outside, it is within. And your imagination, your own wonderful human imagination, is not merely a dreamer. It is the creator. At first I could not accept that without trembling. I wanted it to be true, but I feared it might not be. I feared disappointment. I feared the ridicule of my own mind. I feared that I would attempt and fail. But the more I sat with it, the more I noticed that even my fear was proof of something. Fear arose because the idea threatened my old identity. And anything that threatens an old identity will produce resistance. So resistance is not proof that it is false. Resistance is often proof that it is powerful. And if you feel resistance now as you listen, do not take it as a sign to stop. Take it as a sign that you are touching the very place where your life can change. So I continued. I listened to Abdullah, not with blind faith, but with a willingness to test. And the first test was not a grand desire. It was not some enormous sum. It was not a dramatic event. The first test was simply this. Could I fall asleep in a different feeling than I had carried for years? Could I go to sleep, even for one night, without the confession, nothing works? Could I let the final thought of the day be something else? Could I hear, inwardly, a different sentence? And that, my friend, is where my life began to turn. Not because the outer world suddenly changed that night, but because the one who entered sleep changed. And as I changed, the outer world, obedient and faithful, began to reflect that change in ways so natural that if you did not know the law, you would call them coincidence. But I knew where it began. It began in my years of struggle. It began in those small rooms. It began in New York. It began when I was tired of trying harder and seeing nothing move. It began when I was introduced to a simple sentence that at first offended my logic and then saved my life. Imagination is the only reality. And because it is, the story you have lived is not the story you must continue. Because it is, the pattern that has repeated is not the pattern that must remain. Because it is, the feeling that nothing works can be replaced. And once replaced, your world must rearrange itself to match the new confession, the new state, the new identity. So now, having shared this with you, having stood with you in my own old rooms and my own old doubts, I want you to feel this. You are not alone in your weariness, and you are not foolish for having tried. But the time has come to try in a different way. Not by forcing the day, by changing the night. And in the next part, I will begin to lead you, gently and without strain, toward the very threshold where I first began to prove it. If you take anything from my confession, let it be this. My life did not begin to change when my days became more impressive. It did not change when my effort became more strained. It did not change when I learned to argue more cleverly with circumstance. It changed when I began to understand what the day truly is and what the night truly is. Most men believe the day creates. They believe the world is built by daylight, by motion, by struggle, by the sweat of the brow, and the endless pushing of thought upon thought. They rise in the morning, and they feel as though they are stepping into the workshop of creation. And they believe that by working hard enough, by worrying long enough, by planning wisely enough, they will shape their destiny. Yet again and again, they discover that the day is stubborn. The day has a kind of cruelty in it, not because it wishes to harm, but because it is not the creative moment they think it is. The day is not the womb. The day is the child. The day is not the seed. The day is not the seed. The day is the harvest. You may labor all day with your hands and still feel the same heaviness at night. You may speak to 10 men, make 10 plans, send 10 letters, and still return to the same narrow room, the same anxious feeling, the same question in the heart: why is nothing changing? And the answer is not that life is unfair. The answer is not that God is withholding. The answer is not that you are incapable. The answer is something far quieter, far more hidden, and once seen, far more liberating. The day reacts. The night creates. I did not always understand this. In my early years, I was like everyone else. I believed that the visible world was primary, and that consciousness merely observed it. I believed that circumstances were causes, and that my thoughts were only responses. I believed that the day was the master, and I was the servant. So I fought with the day. When the day showed me lack, I fought it by trying to acquire. When the day showed me rejection, I fought it by trying to persuade. When the day showed me delay, I fought it by pushing harder. When the day showed me uncertainty, I fought it by worrying. And what did that produce? It produced exhaustion. For conscious effort applied to a state you have not changed is like rowing against a current that never stops. You may row with all your strength, but the river beneath you continues to carry you in the direction of your deeper assumption. You may wear your arms out and still find yourself in the same place. This is why so many honest, hard-working people remain trapped. Their effort is real, but their state is unchanged. They work from the same identity, and therefore they reproduce the same life. Now understand me, I do not condemn work. A man must do what is before him to do. But I tell you from experience that the outer action of the day does not change the inner man unless the inner man is first changed. The outer action is always an echo. It cannot become the original sound. You see, the conscious mind, what you call your waking mind, is a marvelous instrument, but it is not the creator, it is the chooser. It selects from what already exists within you. It reacts to what it believes to be true. It argues, it compares, it judges, it fears, it hopes. But it does not plant the seed in the deep soil where reality is formed. The conscious mind is like a lantern carried through a house at night. It lights up one room at a time. It can show you what is already there. It can help you arrange small things on the surface. But it does not build the house. The house was built long before the lantern was lit. In the same way, your day is the lantern. It moves through the rooms of your life and reveals what exists. And you call that revelation reality. You say, this is my condition. You say, this is my fate. But you are only looking at what was built in the unseen moments before. This is why I say, the day reacts. It reveals. It echoes. It confirms. It plays out the drama of what you have already accepted as true in the deeper self. And the night, by night, I do not mean the clock's hour or the darkness outside your window, but the state when the senses soften and the inner world becomes primary. This is the creative chamber. This is the womb. This is where the seed is planted. This is where the deeper self receives its instructions. If you could truly feel the difference, you would cease trying to wrestle the day into submission. You would begin to approach the night with reverence. You would begin to understand that the last moments before sleep are not merely rest. They are decree. Most people do not know this. They go to sleep as tired victims of the day. They carry the day into the night like a sack of stones. They lie down and they rehearse. They replay. They argue with what happened. They worry about what might happen. They feel regret. They feel fear. They feel the weight of unfinished things. And then, with all that in them, they drift into sleep. They do not realize that sleep is not merely unconsciousness. Sleep is acceptance. Sleep is surrender. Sleep is the moment when the conscious guard lowers, and the deeper mind, the subconscious, receives the final impression as its command. So the man who falls asleep worried has not merely had a worried day. He has planted worry as a seed. The woman who falls asleep, remembering her failures, has not merely remembered. She has given life again to the state of failure. She has impressed it upon the soil of her being. The man who falls asleep, afraid of tomorrow, has already accepted tomorrow's fear as true. He has entered the womb of creation, holding the very thing he does not want. And the womb does not judge what it holds. It simply nurtures it. You must begin to see this, not as an idea, but as a law. The subconscious is not moral. It is not sentimental. It is not impressed by your good intentions. It is impressed by your feeling. It receives what you are, not what you wish you were. It brings forth what you assume to be true, not what you hope might become true someday. So the great human error is not merely negative thinking. It is sleeping in the wrong state. People speak of faith, but they do not understand that the truest faith is not what you say aloud in the day when you are trying to comfort yourself. The truest faith is the feeling you carry into sleep, when no one is listening, when you are alone, when you are honest with yourself, and you are sinking into the deep. That is your prayer. That is your confession. That is your seed. And it is here that I learned something that startled me, and perhaps it will startle you as well. But if you will let it enter you, it will free you. You never fall asleep as who you want to be. You fall asleep as who you believe you are. Consider it carefully. Do not rush past it. A man may want to be wealthy. He may read books. He may speak of abundance. He may even say, I shall be rich. But if he lies down at night and feels himself to be poor, if he feels the tightness, the worry, the smallness, the fear, then he falls asleep as the poor man. He plants poverty, regardless of what he wanted. A woman may want to be loved. She may tell herself, I will find love. She may dream of companionship. But if she lies down feeling unwanted, forgotten, unchosen, then she falls asleep as the unloved woman. She plants that state, and life, obedient to the seed, brings forth more evidence to confirm it. A man may want freedom. He may long to be released from some burden. But if he falls asleep as the one who is trapped, helpless, bound, then he will wake and meet the echo of that trap again. Not because life hates him, but because life is faithful to the state he entered. This is not punishment. It is precision. And the precision is what frightens some men when they first see it, because it means they can no longer pretend that their nights do not matter. It means they must take responsibility for what they allow to be their final inner mood. But that responsibility is also the key. For if your life has been faithful to your unconscious seed, then your life can also be faithful to a new seed. You see, many think the secret is in the day. They think if they could only change the outward pattern, change their employment, change their city, change their companions, change their routine, then the inner life would improve. Yet they change the scene and carry the same state into it, and therefore they reproduce the same story with new actors. The state is the cause. The scene is the effect. So the day does not create because the day is the scene. The day is the theater. The day is the stage upon which the state plays itself out. The day can only present what the inner man has accepted. This is why conscious effort so often fails. Because conscious effort is usually applied as a desperate attempt to change the stage, while the actor remains the same. A poor actor will play poverty in a palace. A fearful actor will play fear in a safe room. A defeated actor will play defeat even when opportunity appears, because he will interpret opportunity through defeat and therefore misuse it. But a changed actor, a changed state, will produce a different play, even on the same stage, the same city, the same streets, the same modest room, and yet a new life begins to unfold, because the one who inhabits it has changed within. This is not poetry. It is not philosophy. It is practical truth. I discovered, painfully at first, that the day is mostly a repetition. It is the continuation of yesterday's seed, and as long as I continued to sleep in the same feeling, uncertainty, strain, lack, I was planting the same harvest. So I began to watch my nights. And I noticed something that will be familiar to you if you are honest. At night, when the light is low and the body grows quiet, the mind often becomes a theater of memory. Old conversations return. Old embarrassments replay. Failures march through the imagination, like soldiers. And you lying there think you are merely remembering. But memory is not neutral. Memory is a state. When you relive a failure with feeling, you are not visiting the past. You are planting the past again, as your future. You are telling the subconscious, this is what I am, this is what is true. And the subconscious accepts it, and the world must echo it. So the man who falls asleep saying inwardly, I always fail, even if he never speaks it aloud, will find that life rearranges itself to prove him right. Not because life wants him to fail, but because life wants to be consistent with his belief. And the most tragic part is that he will then call it fate. He will say, you see, it is always the same. He does not realize he is the one who has been faithful to the same seed. Now do not misunderstand me. I am not saying that you should condemn yourself for every anxious thought. If you are human, you will have them. The mind has habits, and habits do not vanish in a single hour. But I am telling you that the creative moment is not every fleeting thought. The creative moment is your surrender. What you consent to as true as you fall asleep becomes the pattern. And because sleep is surrender, whatever feeling you carry into that surrender becomes the decree. It is like sealing a letter. You may write many drafts in the day. You may begin a sentence and change it. You may cross out words. But when you seal the letter and send it, that is what goes forth. Sleep is the sealing. So if you spend the day trying to speak a new language of consciousness, but at night you seal the old message, the old message is what goes forth. This is why I say the day reacts. It reacts to the sealed message of the night before. It reacts to the seed you planted in surrender. And because most people seal the old message nightly, their days appear stubborn and repetitive. They keep receiving the same kind of encounters, the same kind of disappointments, the same kind of limitations, and they think life has a fixed character. But life has no fixed character. Life is a mirror, and the mirror reflects the state you most deeply occupy, especially the state you enter in the stillness before sleep. There is a subtlety here that I want you to feel, not simply understand. Many will say, but I am awake for so many hours. Surely the day must have power. It has power to the extent that it affects your state. But the state itself is what matters. The day may tempt you into fear. Yes. The day may offer you evidence of lack. Yes. The day may present you with some harsh fact. But if you do not consent to that fact as the truth of your being, if you do not carry it into sleep as your identity, it cannot become tomorrow's seed. The day is like weather. It may rain, it may be cold, it may be unpleasant. But the weather does not determine the harvest unless it changes what is planted and what is nurtured. Your inner consent is the nurturing. Your sleeping feeling is the planting. Now, when I first saw this, it was as though I discovered why so many sincere prayers seemed unanswered. People pray in the day with their words, and then they fall asleep with their fear. And the subconscious does not obey the words. It obeys the fear. They declare, I shall be blessed. And then they lie down feeling cursed. They declare, I am protected, and then they drift into sleep, feeling vulnerable. They declare, things will improve, and then they surrender to the feeling that nothing ever improves. And because sleep is the doorway to the subconscious receives the feeling and not the declaration. So the prayer, in effect, was the feeling, not the words. This is why conscious effort fails. Conscious effort is usually a battle between words and feelings. And feelings win, because feelings are the language of the deeper mind. So what is the secret hidden from most? It is not a complicated technique. It is not some special ritual. It is not something reserved for the educated or the gifted. It is the simple recognition that the creative act happens when you are most receptive. And you are most receptive when you are drifting into sleep. Then your conscious arguments are quiet. Then your old logic is softened. Then your body is surrendered. Then the deeper mind is open, like rich soil waiting. And whatever you allow to be true of yourself in that moment becomes the command that life must execute. This is why a man can work hard for years and remain stuck, and then, with one profound shift of state at night, see his whole world begin to rearrange. It is not because the world suddenly became kinder. it is because he stopped planting the old state. He stopped sealing the old message. He stopped falling asleep as the defeated man. And that is why I said earlier, and I say again now, things began to work for me, not when I tried harder, but when I slept differently. Now, I am not yet giving you a method in the sense of steps and instructions. I am simply revealing to you the hidden structure of life, so that you begin to feel that you are touching something real. You may have sensed it before. Perhaps you have noticed that some days you wake with a strange lightness, as though something shifted in the night. And those days, without effort, life seems smoother. People are kinder. Doors open. You feel guided. And you may have thought it is just a good mood. But mood is state, and state is creative. Or perhaps you have noticed the opposite. You fall asleep troubled, and you wake to a day that seems full of obstacles, even small ones, as though the world conspired to irritate you. You may have said, I am unlucky today. But it was not luck. It was seed. If you begin to observe your life in this way, you will begin to feel that you understand something that most do not see. You will stop believing that days are isolated events. You will start seeing the continuity, evening to morning, inner to outer, seed to harvest. And then you will understand why Scripture, in its own symbolic language, speaks of evening and morning as the order of creation. Not morning and evening, but evening and morning. The unseen first, then the seen. The inner act first, then the outer echo. So why does the day not create? Because the day is the echo. You cannot shout at an echo and expect it to change its tone. The echo repeats what was sounded. If you want a different echo, you must change the sound. And the sound, the original utterance, is your state. And the moment the state is most potently impressed is the moment you surrender into sleep. This is why effort often fails. Effort tries to change the echo while leaving the original sound untouched. Effort argues with the reflection in the mirror instead of changing the face. Effort fights the shadow instead of turning toward the light. Now I want you to feel the tragedy and the beauty of the truth I am saying. The tragedy is that men have been taught to fear the night. They have been taught to think of sleep as mere unconsciousness. They have been taught to collapse into it without awareness. So they bring into it their burdens and their worries, and they do not know that they are planting them. And because they do not know, they repeat them. They become trapped in a wheel, and they call it life. But the beauty is that the same mechanism that has kept them trapped can free them. If you have been planting failure, you can plant success. If you have been planting lack, you can plant sufficiency. If you have been planting loneliness, you can plant companionship. If you have been planting struggle, you can plant ease. Because the soil does not argue, it receives. And sleep is the moment you place the seed in that soil. So if you wish to change your life, you must not only desire change in the day, you must become change in the night. You must become, at the level of feeling, the one who already is what you desire to be. Not in a strained way, not in a theatrical way, in a quiet, natural way. For what you are at the moment of sleep is what the subconscious accepts as the truth of you, and life will always inevitably reflect the truth you accept. Now, let me speak to you about the particular mistake almost all men make, even those who have heard these ideas. They hear that imagination creates reality, and they become excited. They decide to imagine something new. They do it once, perhaps twice. They feel a little uplifted. They go through the day, hoping it will work, but then the day tests them. A bill arrives, a discouraging letter, a harsh word from someone, a delay. And immediately they say inwardly, it is not working. Do you see what they have done? They have returned to the old state. They have made the day their authority again. They have bowed to the echo and called it the original voice. So that night, though they may try to imagine again, they carry doubt into it. They carry impatience. They carry the feeling of, perhaps this is not real. And then they fall asleep in that feeling. And because they do, the seed becomes doubt, and the harvest becomes more delay, more evidence that seems to confirm doubt. And then they conclude that the law does not work, when in truth the law worked perfectly. It mirrored their state. So the real revelation is not merely that night creates. It is that your identity is what creates. And your identity is most honestly revealed in the night, when you stop performing for the world and you become what you truly feel you are. This is why you must begin to be very gentle, but very truthful with yourself. Ask yourself, not with judgment, but with curiosity, who do I become when I lie down? Do I become the one who worries? Do I become the one who replays failure? Do I become the one who expects disappointment? Do I become the one who feels life is hard? If so, that is the seed, and the seed is not punished. The seed is multiplied. So if you wish a new harvest, you must plant a new self. And the planting is done, not with effort, but with surrender. Not by fighting the day, but by choosing the night. I tell you, the night is where you are most powerful, not because you are asleep, but because you are near the doorway of the subconscious. And the subconscious is the builder. It builds quietly. It builds without argument. It builds without asking your permission. It builds from the pattern you give it. And because it builds quietly, you may not see it at first, but you will feel it. You will feel a change in your own being. You will wake different, even before the world shows the evidence. And that inner difference is the first sign that the seed has been changed. So do not despise small beginnings. Do not say, but nothing has changed outwardly. That is the language of the day. And the day is not the creator. The night is the creator. And the proof of creation is first in the feeling. If you begin to feel differently, you have already changed something fundamental. You have changed the seed, and a changed seed must produce a changed harvest. It cannot do otherwise. Now, you may ask, why is sleep so decisive? Why does the night carry such power? Because in sleep, you are no longer divided by constant sense perception. In the day, your senses bombard you. They tell you what is. They shout evidence. They command attention. They insist this is reality. And because you have been trained to worship the senses, you accept their report as final. But at night, the senses grow dim. The world fades. The body becomes still. And the imagination, which is always present but often ignored, becomes more vivid. The inner world becomes closer. The boundary becomes thin. In that threshold, imagination can be accepted as real, not as a fantasy, but as a present fact of feeling. And that acceptance is the creative act. So the secret is not in forcing yourself to believe in the day against every appearance. The secret is in entering the night gently and allowing the new feeling to become natural there, where the senses are quiet. The night is merciful. It helps you. It softens the hard edges of logic. It loosens the grip of habit. It opens the door without your having to break it down. This is why I say that most men fail, not because they lack desire, but because they do not understand where creation happens. They keep trying to create at the level of the echo. They keep trying to command the mirror. They keep trying to argue with shadows. And then they exhaust themselves and conclude life is stubborn. But life is not stubborn. Life is faithful. It is faithful to your state. And your state is most potently impressed when you surrender into sleep. Now let this understanding settle in you as a quiet knowing, not as a burden. If you have been falling asleep worried, you were not wrong as a person. You were simply unaware of the law. You were doing what you were trained to do. You were rehearsing what you feared. And the subconscious, like good soil, took what you planted. But now you see. And when you see, you can change. Not by fighting yourself, but by choosing a different final feeling. You can begin to say, gently, I will no longer fall asleep as the old man. I will no longer surrender to the old confession. And if you begin to feel the significance of that decision, you will realize you are holding the key that few ever consciously hold. For most men's lives are determined not by great dramatic choices, but by the quiet, habitual feeling with which they end each day. They fall asleep as who they believe they are, and because they repeat it nightly, it becomes solid. But if you change that belief, if you begin to fall asleep as who you choose to be, then life must, in time, harden into that new form. So as you listen to me now, let it be as though a veil is lifting. Let it be as though you are being initiated into the simplest and most hidden truth. The day is not your master, it is your mirror, and the night is your workshop. The night is where you plant. The night is where you consent. The night is where you become. And because you become there, you will soon see, without strain, that the day begins to echo something new. Not because you forced it, because you changed what you were when you surrendered. Hold on to this sentence, for it carries the whole revelation. The day reacts, the night creates. And this too, you never fall asleep as who you want to be. You fall asleep as who you believe you are. Now, if you are wise, you will stop trying to become in the day what you will not be in the night. You will stop making declarations that you deny with your secret feeling. You will stop asking the day to give you what you have not accepted as yours in the night. And you will begin quietly to prepare yourself for the one act that changes everything. Entering sleep in a new identity. I have not yet given you the full manner of doing it, not because it is difficult, but because I want you to feel the necessity of it first. I want you to feel why it is the hinge on which life turns. For once you grasp this, you will not treat sleep casually again. You will not enter it carrying failure. You will not enter it carrying worry. You will not enter it rehearsing the old story. You will understand that the last feeling is a seed, and if it is a seed, you will choose it, gently, faithfully, as one who has finally discovered where creation truly happens. There is a place within you that few have ever honored, though all have visited it nightly. It is not a room made of wood or stone. It is not a chapel built by hands. Yet it is more sacred than any structure raised in the outer world, because it is the chamber where creation receives its command. I speak of that quiet borderland between waking and sleep. You have drifted through it 1,000 times without naming it. You have passed through it as a weary man passes through a doorway in the dark, hardly noticing where he is, thinking only of rest. And because you did not recognize it, you surrendered it. You gave that holy moment over to habit. You allowed the day to follow you into it like a shadow. But when a man begins to awaken to the truth that the day reacts and the night creates, he begins to look upon that borderland with new eyes. He begins to feel that the final minutes before sleep are not merely the end of the day, but the beginning of destiny. It is a strange thing, this state. You cannot seize it like an object. You cannot force it like a door that resists. It comes of itself, gently, inevitably. Like dusk arriving when the sun has done its work, you may resist it for hours, and still it will come. You may chase it with impatience, and it will slip away. But if you relax, if you soften, if you allow yourself to be led by the natural rhythm of your being, you will find it waiting for you as faithfully as night waits for evening. When I first became aware of it, I did not call it anything special. I only noticed that there was a moment when the body ceased to demand attention. The muscles would loosen, not because I commanded them, but because the will that had held them tightened through the day began to release. The limbs would grow warm and heavy, as though the weight of the world had been lifted from them and placed gently into the mattress beneath. The hands, which through the day had clenched and opened and labored, would become quiet, resting with a kind of innocent surrender. And the breath, how softly the breath changes when you approach that borderland. In the day, breath is often hurried, pulled by thought, disturbed by worry. But near sleep, if you allow it, breath becomes like a tide. It comes in and it goes out, not as a struggle, but as a natural movement of life. You feel yourself being breathed, rather than breathing. The body begins to move toward stillness, the way a lake moves toward calm after the wind has ceased. In that calm, the mind also changes its texture. I do not mean that thoughts suddenly vanish like smoke. At first, Thoughts still rise, but they rise differently. They lose their sharpness. The hard edges of logic soften. The arguments that seemed so urgent in daylight begin to feel distant, almost irrelevant, like a conversation overheard from far down the street. The mind becomes less a judge and more a listener, less a hammer and more a velvet cloth. And then something remarkable begins to happen. Imagination becomes vivid, not as a deliberate act, but as a natural presence. Images float up gently as though from a deeper water. A scene may appear without your summoning it. A voice may be heard inwardly, not with the outer ear, but with a clarity that makes you pause. A feeling may rise in the chest, and for a moment it seems more real than the bed beneath you. That is the borderland. And it is sacred, not because it is mysterious, but because it is receptive. It is the moment when the deeper self is open. The moment when the subconscious, faithful, impartial, endlessly fertile, leans forward, as it were, to receive the final impression. I remember my first nights of truly noticing it. I was not sitting in some grand house with comfort and luxury around me. I was, as I have told you, a young man in modest circumstances, living in small rooms, often surrounded by the noise of the city, with thin walls and the sounds of footsteps and voices passing by. My life outwardly did not suggest anything holy. And yet, in those very rooms, I began to discover holiness, not in the outer arrangement, but in the inner opening. I began to realize that the creative power within man does not require perfect silence outside, only a withdrawal of attention from the outside. It does not require wealth to begin. It creates wealth. It does not require ease to function. It produces ease. So night after night, I would lie down and simply become aware. I would not demand anything. I would not strain for some dramatic experience. I would simply feel the body becoming heavy, and I would notice the mind becoming soft, and I would recognize that I was approaching a threshold. At first, I did not attempt great things. I did not reach for the grandest desires. I tested the law as one tests a new instrument, gently, with respect, and with small proofs that would strengthen confidence without provoking fear. You must understand this. When a man has lived long in hardship, the idea of sudden great change can frighten him. Not because he does not want it, but because the unfamiliar can feel unsafe, even when it is good. So I did not attempt to shock my own mind. I allowed it to be led. One night, for instance, I desired something very simple, something that would have meant little to a wealthy man, but to me at that time it carried weight. I wanted to receive a letter, not an ordinary letter, but a certain kind of correspondence that would indicate a door was opening for me. I had no outward reason to expect it. I had no connection, no guarantee. It was simply a desire that rose within me. As I lay there, drifting toward that borderland, I did not plead for it. I did not try to make it happen. I simply allowed myself, in that softened state, to feel what it would be like if it had already happened. I imagined, lightly, the feel of the envelope in my hand. I imagined the simple satisfaction of seeing my name written upon it. I imagined opening it and reading words that implied what I wanted. And the strange thing was not the picture itself, but the feeling it produced. For a moment, the desire was no longer a desire. It was an experience. I felt the quiet relief of it. And in that borderland, relief is a powerful thing. Relief is the signal that the struggle has ended. Relief is the confession it is done. I did not hold the scene with force. I did not repeat it desperately. I allowed it to become natural, and then I fell asleep. Days passed. I did not count them with anxiety. I did not sit by the window waiting like a hungry dog for a bone. I simply lived. And then, in a way so ordinary it would have seemed like chance to anyone else, the letter came. It arrived without drama. Yet when I held it in my hands, I felt an inner recognition, so quiet and so sure that I could not deny it. I had been there before. I had touched this already, in that borderland. The outer event was merely the echo of an inner acceptance, Another time, I tested it with something even smaller. An encounter, a word spoken, a simple kindness from someone who had been indifferent. You might think these things trivial, but they are not trivial when you are learning the nature of reality. A small change that corresponds precisely to an inner act is a jewel. It is a proof. It is the law showing you its signature. And so I would lie down, enter that softened state, and feel the end. Not with long scenes and complicated dramas, but with a single moment that carried the fragrance of fulfillment. A handshake. A voice saying, yes. A smile, a simple sentence implying success. Sometimes the result was so subtle that only I would recognize it. A man would speak differently to me the next day. A door that had seemed closed would open, not with thunder, but with a quiet turn of the handle. An opportunity would appear as though it had always been there, and I would think, it was there, but I was not in the state to see it. Now I was. These were my first nights of discovery, and what they taught me was not merely that imagination produces results, but that the state itself is the secret. For in that borderland, you begin to see that imagination is not a pastime, it is not idle fancy. It is the very substance of creation, and feeling is the seal. When I say, I did not wish to make this into a method, understand me. The moment a man thinks of it as a method, he is tempted to strain. He is tempted to treat it as something he must do correctly, like a puzzle. And strain is the language of doubt. Strain says, it is not natural, it is not mine. I must force it. But the borderland does not respond to force, it responds to surrender. It is like water in the hands. If you clutch, it runs through your fingers. If you hold gently, it rests. So I began to approach that state as an experience, not as a technique. I began to regard it as communion, a quiet meeting between myself and the deeper power within me that never sleeps, even when the body does. And I learned to recognize its signs. The first sign is heaviness. Not the heaviness of sickness, but the heaviness of surrender. The limbs feel as though they belong to the bed. The body becomes less like a soldier, standing at attention, and more like a child, resting in safety. You can still move if you wish, but movement feels unnecessary. It feels like noise in a room that has grown silent. The second sign is softness. The mind stops gripping. It stops biting into problems. It stops chewing endlessly on the same worries. Thoughts may still appear, but they float rather than strike. They pass like clouds, rather than march like troops. A third sign is vividness. The inner world grows bright. A simple imagined touch can feel real. A voice heard inwardly can carry warmth. An unseen scene can stir the heart as powerfully as a visible one. When those three signs come together, heaviness, softness, vividness, you are near the threshold. And at that threshold, the smallest impression can become a seed. This is why I call it sacred, not because it is complicated, but because it is receptive beyond the ordinary measure. In the day, you may attempt to convince yourself of something, and the senses argue back. In the borderland, the senses are quiet, and the inner acceptance can slip through without resistance. It is like writing on soft wax. In the day, the wax is hard, and the stylus scratches, without leaving a deep mark. But in that state, the wax is warm, the impression is clean, the mark remains. Now if you have lived for years in a certain state, fear, lack, disappointment, you may wonder, how can a few minutes before sleep change what years have built? My friend, because years were built by minutes. They were built by repeated impressions, repeated nightly confessions, repeated surrenders into the same feeling. It was never one great event that created your pattern. It was the habit of state. So the change does not require violence. It requires a new habit of surrender. When I first began to practice this consciously, I noticed something else that startled me. The moment I entered that borderland, the old self would often attempt to follow me in. It would bring its familiar burdens, like a man who insists on carrying his baggage even into a sanctuary. Old worries would rise. Old memories would present themselves. Old arguments would demand attention. At first, I fought them. I thought I must banish them. But fighting kept me awake. Fighting gave them importance. Fighting was still a confession that they had power. Then I learned something gentler. I learned to let them be, and to turn away from them. If a worry rose, I would not wrestle it. I would simply feel something else. I would feel the end. If a memory of failure appeared, I would not debate it. I would let it drift away like a leaf on water, and I would bring my attention back to the feeling of fulfillment. This is not harsh. It is not denial. It is selection. In the borderland, you are selecting the seed you will plant, and selection is a quiet act. So I began to treat that state as one treats a garden, not with panic, but with care. If weeds appeared, I did not curse the garden. I simply did not plant weeds again. I chose a new seed. And gradually, the borderland became familiar to me, not as a rare mystical event, but as a natural nightly doorway. I began to look forward to it, not because I was chasing results like a gambler chasing a win, but because I felt I was returning to the place where I was most myself. For in that softened state, you are not performing for the world. You are not trying to prove anything. You are not defending your identity. You are simply being. And in that being, you discover something that will change your whole attitude toward life. You are not trapped by circumstance. You are only trapped by the state you continue to occupy. In those early nights, the results were often subtle, but they carried a precision that could not be dismissed. If I imagined a simple phrase spoken to me, I would hear it later from a mouth I did not expect. If I imagined a door opening, I would find a door open, sometimes a literal door, sometimes a figurative one, in the form of an invitation, a chance meeting, a sudden offer. If I imagined relief, I would find that something I had worried about dissolved quietly, not always dramatically, often gently, like dawn. And I began to see that life has a tenderness when you work with it from within, when you stop fighting the outer world and begin to change the inner man. The outer world seems almost eager to comply, as though it had been waiting for you to give it a new command. Yet again, I do not want you to hear this as a promise of fireworks. The law is not theatrical, it is faithful. Sometimes, the greatest manifestation is not the sudden appearance of money or opportunity, but the quiet shift in you. You wake, and you feel different. You cannot explain it. The room looks the same, the street outside is the same, but you are not the same. Your chest is lighter, your breath is deeper, your thoughts are calmer. That, my friend, is creation beginning. That is the seed taking root. And because it is invisible at first, many abandon it. They say, nothing happened, but something happened. The most important thing happened. You changed the inner confession. When you enter that borderland, and you feel the end, you are doing something more profound than imagining a scene. You are consenting to a new identity. And identity is what hardens into fact. So I began to approach each night as an opportunity to change who I was. Not in the sense of pretending, not in the sense of acting, but in the sense of inhabiting. There is a difference between acting wealthy and being wealthy within. The one strains, the other rests. The borderland is where rest makes being possible. Because when the body is heavy and the mind is soft, you can feel yourself to be the one who has already received, without your senses shouting in protest. You can accept it quietly, and acceptance is the whole secret. I remember one particular night when this truth touched me deeply. I had been thinking of a desire that felt large for me at the time, larger than the small proofs I had tested. The old part of me began to whisper, be reasonable. Do not go too far. Keep your desires small. It spoke with the voice of what the world calls prudence, but it was fear, dressed in respectable clothing. That night, as I lay there and felt the body grow heavy, I noticed that whisper, and I noticed something else as well. The borderland does not care what is reasonable. It does not measure by the standards of society. It responds to feeling. And in that softened state, I felt a new courage rise. Not loud, not proud, but calm. I realized that the only reason the desire felt large was because my identity was small. So I did not attempt to get the desire. I attempted to become the one for whom that desire was natural. I let myself feel the relief of it, the simple satisfaction, the quiet, knowing that it was already mine. And as I did, the fear did not vanish by force. It faded by irrelevance. For fear cannot live comfortably in a state of fulfillment. It can only live in a state of waiting. So I refused to wait, not with violence, with surrender, and I fell asleep in that feeling. The next day did not immediately look like the fulfillment, but I felt something in me had shifted. I walked differently. I spoke differently. I did not cling to outcomes with desperation. And in time, sometimes faster than I would have predicted, life presented the bridge that led to the very thing I had accepted. This taught me that the borderland is not merely the place you imagine things, it is the place you choose yourself. And once you choose yourself, life must choose you accordingly. Now you may wonder why I speak of this state with such reverence. It is because I have seen what happens when men ignore it. They fall asleep in resentment, and they wake to a world that gives them more to resent. They fall asleep in loneliness, and they wake to a world that confirms isolation. They fall asleep in fear, and they wake to days full of anxious signs. Not because the world is cruel, but because the world is faithful. And then, when they learn to honor the borderland, the pattern reverses. They fall asleep in gratitude, and they wake to reasons for gratitude. They fall asleep in the feeling of being loved, and they meet love. They fall asleep in the feeling of provision, and they find provision arriving in forms they could not have planned. The day reacts, the night creates. I keep returning to that because it is the foundation beneath everything I will say later. Without this understanding, a man will try to use imagination as a trick, and he will fail and become bitter. But with this understanding, he will approach imagination as the most natural thing in the world, the silent act of becoming. And becoming is easiest in that borderland, because the senses are quiet. You may have experienced moments like this already without naming them. Perhaps you have woken from sleep after a vivid dream and felt that the dream's emotion lingered into the day. If the dream was joyful, you carried joy. If the dream was fearful, you carried fear. The dream itself may fade, but the state remains. Now consider, if a dream, something you did not consciously choose, can imprint a state upon you, how much more can a chosen feeling in the borderland imprint a state that will shape your day? The borderland is like the open gate. Whatever passes through, it enters the inner city and becomes law there. So I began to treat it not as a casual drift into unconsciousness, but as the most delicate, powerful passage in the whole cycle of living. Yet I must repeat, do not make of it a mechanical thing. If you attempt to turn it into a rigid practice, you will tighten. If you tighten, you will remain awake. If you remain awake, the senses will argue, and then you will believe it is difficult. It is not difficult. It is natural. It is as natural as letting the shoulders drop, as natural as allowing a sigh, as natural as turning from the noise of the street to the quiet of your own room. The borderland is already coming to you tonight. It comes to you every night. The only difference is whether you enter it unconsciously, carrying the old state, or consciously carrying a new one. So rather than thinking, how do I do it perfectly? Think, what do I want to be when I surrender? Do not seek a perfect picture. Seek a true feeling. For the picture is only a vessel. The feeling is the seed. In my earliest nights, I often used very simple imaginal touches. I might imagine the pressure of a friend's hand in mine. I might imagine hearing a voice say a single confirming sentence. I might imagine the quiet satisfaction of seeing a task completed. And what made these imaginal acts powerful was not detail. It was reality of feeling. If the hand felt real, if the voice felt warm, if the satisfaction felt natural, then the act was complete. It was planted. It required no further effort. Then I would let myself drift, and drifting itself became part of the acceptance. For when you drift into sleep, while still wearing the fragrance of fulfillment, the subconscious receives it as your final confession. This is why I call it inevitable. Because you will drift anyway. You will fall asleep anyway. The question is only what you will be as you fall. Most men think they cannot control their last thoughts. They say, "My mind races." But the mind races because you have given it nothing gentler to carry. You have allowed it to run through the fields of worry, because you have not offered it the quiet meadow of fulfillment. Give it a new pasture, and it will graze there, not instantly perhaps. Habits resist at first, but do it kindly, consistently, and you will find your mind begins to associate the night with peace rather than turmoil. I have watched this happen in myself and in many others. A man who once could not sleep because of anxiety learns to enter the borderland with a different mood. He begins to feel safe. He begins to feel provided for. The body follows. The breath slows. Sleep comes. And then, as if by a gentle miracle, the days that follow begin to lighten. Not because sleep itself is magic, but because the seed has been changed. The borderland is where you change the seed. Now let me tell you plainly what I felt in those early nights when the borderland first became real to me. There was a sense of being nearer to the truth of myself. In the day, we are distracted by roles. We are pulled by demands. We are weighed down by appearances. But in that softened state, the outer mask slips, and you meet the inner man. And the inner man, the true self, is imagination. Not imagination as the world mocks it, but imagination as the creative power that gives form to life. When you feel this, you stop thinking of imagination as something you do and begin to recognize it as what you are. And if you are imagination, then the borderland is not merely a time of day. It is the moment you return to yourself. So I would lie there, body heavy, mind soft, imagination alive, and I would feel as though I had stepped into a quieter room within my own being, a room where the arguments of the day could not follow me unless I invited them. I began to understand why so many ancient stories speak of revelation coming in the night, of dreams carrying messages, of visions appearing when the senses are closed. The night has always been the doorway, because it withdraws the tyranny of the senses and allows the inner world to speak. This is why I caution you again. Do not turn it into mere practice. Approach it as you would approach a sacred moment. If you were to enter a chapel, you would not rush in shouting and demanding. You would enter quietly. You would lower your voice. You would let your heart soften. In the same way, enter the borderland with respect. Respect does not mean fear. Respect means recognition. Recognition that the state you enter is creative. Recognition that the last feeling is a seed. Recognition that you are about to impress upon your own subconscious the pattern it must produce. In those early nights, even my failures taught me. There were times when I attempted to enter the borderland, carrying a new feeling, but my old worries returned so strongly that I fell asleep in the old state, and then I would see the echo in the day that followed. At first, this discouraged me, but then I realized even my discouragement was proof. It proved the law's precision. It proved that sleep truly was the gateway. It proved that the day was reacting faithfully. So I did not despair. I simply learned. I learned that if I wished to change the harvest, I must be gentler and more persistent in changing the seed. And I learned that the borderland is not conquered by force, but by familiarity. The more often you enter it carrying fulfillment, the more natural fulfillment becomes. It stops feeling like an act. It becomes your home. Then one night, something happens that is difficult to describe, but you will know it when it occurs. The feeling you bring into the borderland begins to carry you. You no longer feel you are trying to believe. You feel you are remembering. The new state feels oddly familiar, as though it has always been yours, and you simply wandered away for a time. That is when the work becomes effortless. And that is when life begins to change with surprising speed. Not because you are doing more, but because you are no longer divided. Your nights and your days begin to speak the same language. Your inner confession becomes consistent, and consistency of state is power. So let the borderland be for you what it became for me. A nightly return to the creative chamber. A quiet moment where you cease wrestling with the echo and instead change the sound. A gentle passage where you stop being the man shaped by yesterday and become the man who shapes tomorrow. If you can feel the poetry of it, you will also feel its practicality. For this is not an airy concept. It is the most practical thing in the world. It is the means by which a man changes his destiny without fighting the world. He changes it by changing himself where change is easiest. When the mind is soft, the body is heavy, and imagination is alive. And because it is an experience and not a technique, you do not need to master it as a scholar masters a lesson. You need only surrender to it as a man surrenders to sleep, but with a new companion. Do not go into the borderland alone with your fears. Go into it with the feeling of the end. Go into it with the quiet sense that what you desire is already yours in consciousness. Go into it with relief. Go into it with peace. Go into it with the new identity you have chosen. And if at first it feels faint, do not judge it. A seed is small, yet it contains a forest. A whisper can change a life, if it is accepted. So tonight and every night, the borderland awaits you. It is already coming. Like evening, it will not fail to arrive. It is inevitable. And because it is inevitable, it can become your ally rather than your unconscious habit. When you begin to honor it, you will feel a strange calm entering your life. Not because you have forced anything, but because you have returned to the place where your power has always been. And you will begin to know, not as a hope, but as an inner certainty, that what you accept there must, in time, appear here. For the borderland is where the unseen becomes seed, and the seed, once planted in feeling, must grow. There is a moment in the life of every earnest man when he must stop blaming the world for its stubbornness and begin to question the one thing he has never truly questioned: himself. Not himself in the sense of his talents or his education or his circumstances, but himself as a state, himself as an identity, quietly worn beneath all his words and actions. For the world, as I have come to know it, is not a creator. It is a reflector. It does not invent. It echoes. It takes the inner man and displays him as outer fact. And so I tell you what I have told thousands in halls and small rooms and quiet gatherings: you do not get what you want. You get what you are. You may want health and still be sick, because you remain identified with sickness. You may want love and still be lonely, because you remain identified with being unwanted. You may want prosperity and still struggle, because you remain identified with lack. Desire is not the cause. Desire is only a messenger, telling you what you would be if you dared to assume a new self. It is one thing to want. It is another thing to ask. And it is something entirely different to assume. To want is to feel the pull of something not yet possessed. It is natural and it is not wrong, but it is incomplete. Wanting is the first stirring of life. But if you remain in wanting, you remain in distance. Wanting says, it is out there, and I am here. To ask is to give power away. A man may ask in humility, but in asking he confesses, I do not have, I cannot, I must be given. And the subconscious mind, which does not reason as you reason, accepts the feeling behind the asking as the truth of your being. If you ask as one who feels helpless, you plant helplessness. If you ask as one who feels unworthy, you plant unworthiness. The words may speak of desire, but the feeling speaks of identity. But to assume is to change your position entirely. To assume is not to beg the outer world to move. It is to move within yourself, and then let the outer world, obedient and faithful, rearrange itself to mirror that movement. Assumption says, I am. It does not say, will I be? It does not say, please make me. It says quietly, firmly, I am that which I desire to be. Life does not respond to desire. Life responds to assumption. You may burn with desire all your days, and yet if you go to bed each night, feeling yourself defeated, life will faithfully give you defeat. You may pray with passion, you may repeat words, you may make promises to heaven, and yet, if you fall asleep in the state of the one who is still waiting, still lacking, still fearing, life will faithfully give you more to wait, for more to lack, more to fear. And this is why so many good, sincere souls feel betrayed by life. They say, I have tried, I have hoped, I have prayed, why does nothing change? And I answer them, not with cruelty, but with compassion, because you asked for change while remaining the same. You wanted a new world while sleeping as the old self. You desired a different harvest while planting the same seed. The law is not cruel, it is exact. I have watched men ruin themselves by insisting that desire alone should move the world. They treat desire like a coin they have paid into a machine, expecting the machine to deliver the prize. And when it does not, they become bitter. But the world is not a machine. It is a mirror. And a mirror cannot show you a different face while you stand before it unchanged. Let me speak to you plainly, as one who has wrestled with this himself. In my own early years, there were nights when my desire was strong, but my identity was stronger. I desired freedom, yet I slept as the one who was bound. I desired abundance, yet I slept as the one who was poor. I desired recognition, yet I slept as the one who felt overlooked. And then I would wake and meet a world that seemed to confirm all that I feared. It was not until I understood that the last state assumed before sleep is the state the subconscious accepts as law that I began to see why life had felt so stubborn. Life was not stubborn. I was faithful to the wrong identity. Now you must understand, identity is not merely what you say about yourself aloud. Many men speak bravely by day and feel defeated by night. Identity is what you accept as true when no one is watching. Identity is what you return to in quiet moments. Identity is the tone of your inner conversation. And above all, identity is what you fall asleep believing you are. If you wish to know the secret of your life, do not examine your desires. Examine your assumptions. Do not ask what you want. Ask what you expect. Ask what feels natural. Ask what you secretly consent to in the depth of your being. For the world will take that secret consent and build your days from it. I have known men who could not keep money, no matter how much they earned. It would come to them and then vanish, as though it passed through their hands like water. They would speak of bad luck, of unfair times, of unfortunate accidents. But when I listened closely, I heard the inner confession. They were men who identified as one, for whom things never last. They did not say it always, but they felt it. They carried it. It was the garment they wore, and life merely fitted itself to that garment. I have known women who longed for love, yet found themselves repeatedly disappointed. They would tell me, it always begins well and ends the same. And there again was the confession. It ends the same. They identified as the one for whom love does not stay. They carried an assumption of being left, of being second, of being forgotten, and life, in its perfect fidelity, played the part they assigned it. I tell you this, not to condemn you, but to free you. For if identity is the cause, then you are not helpless. You are not at the mercy of chance. You are not bound by the past. You are only bound by the state you continue to occupy. And the moment you occupy a new state, you begin a new life. The difference between wanting and assuming is the difference between pleading and possessing. Wanting is a hunger that looks outward. Assuming is a fullness that rests inward. Wanting says, I will be satisfied when I have. Assuming says, I have, and therefore I am satisfied. And satisfaction is not the reward of manifestation. Satisfaction is the cause. I have seen this law operate with such quiet precision that it leaves no room for superstition. A man changes inwardly, and the world changes outwardly. Always, not because the man manipulates people, not because he forces circumstance, but because he has changed the state from which life must unfold. Perhaps you think this is lofty. Perhaps you think it is too abstract. Then let me bring it down into simple living, into stories, into the ordinary miracles that happen when identity shifts. There was a young man who came to me, troubled and weary. He had worked hard, studied diligently, and yet it seemed as though every endeavor ended in disappointment. He would begin with hope and finish with frustration. He told me, "Neville, nothing works for me. It is as though I am cursed." He did not say it with drama. He said it with resignation. That resignation was his state. I asked him, "When you lie down at night, what do you feel about your life?" He answered honestly, "I feel as though tomorrow will be another struggle." I said, "Then you are falling asleep in the state of struggle. You are not merely tired. You are accepting struggle as your identity." He resisted me at first, as most do. He wanted a new job, a better employer, a different city, a new set of circumstances, and I did not deny that such things might come. But I told him, "They will come as shadows of a change in you. Change you first." So I suggested something simple, not a complicated exercise, not a long ritual. I said, "Tonight do not go to bed as the one who struggles. Go to bed as the one to whom things go well. Feel it as a quiet fact, not excitement. Ease. Let your last feeling be, 'Everything works out for me.'" He said, "But that is not true." And I said, "It is not true in the world of Caesar, perhaps, but it can become true if you accept it in the world of consciousness. You want proof before belief. I ask you for belief before proof." He did it reluctantly. The first night he said he felt foolish. The second night he said he drifted into sleep and caught himself returning to old worries, but he persisted gently. He did not fight the old state with anger. He simply returned to the new one like a man returning to a chosen home. Within a short time, he wrote to me, astonished. He said, "Neville, it is strange. The same world seems different. People are kinder. Opportunities appear. I find myself in the right place at the right time." And what was the truth? The world had not suddenly grown generous. He had stopped sleeping as a defeated man. He had begun to sleep as one favored by life. And life, obedient to his assumption, brought forth favor. Another story. A woman, middle-aged, burdened by responsibilities, and long accustomed to worry. Her life had been a chain of obligations. She cared for family, worked beyond her strength, and lived with the constant fear that something would go wrong. She told me, "I cannot rest. Even when I lie down, my mind is busy." Her mind was busy because her identity was one of constant vigilance. She believed she must watch life, as though life were an unruly child that would misbehave if she closed her eyes. I said to her, "My dear, you have been sleeping as a guardian, not as one who is cared for. Tonight, let yourself be cared for. Fall asleep in the feeling, 'I am supported. I am safe. All is well.'" At first she wept, because the thought of being cared for felt foreign. But that very foreignness revealed how deeply she had identified with carrying everything alone. She began to practice the inner surrender, not once, but nightly. And slowly, her sleep improved. Then her days improved. And then, the most natural changes occurred. A family member offered help. A burden that had pressed upon her for years was lifted by circumstances she could not have arranged. She said, "It is as though life finally noticed me." But life had always noticed. It was she who had finally noticed life as her supporter, not her enemy. You may say these are small things. They are not small, they are proofs. They are the law in motion. And once you have proof, your faith begins to grow roots. For faith is not blind belief. Faith is loyalty to an unseen state, because you have tasted its power. There are those who hear this and immediately say, "Then if I assume wealth, I will become wealthy." Yes, but do not misunderstand what wealth is. Wealth is not frantic excitement. Wealth is not a nervous hope. Wealth is not the desperate attempt to escape poverty. Wealth is a calm identity, a quiet sufficiency, a deep assurance. If you fall asleep saying, "I must get money," you are still poor in consciousness. You are still in need. But if you fall asleep feeling, "I am provided for, I am abundant, I am secure," you have moved into the state that produces wealth as naturally as the tree produces fruit. And I have seen people for whom everything seemed to begin working, not because their lives were suddenly without problems, but because their identity shifted. The same events met them, yet they met those events as a new self. A man who identifies as lucky will find luck everywhere. A man who identifies as guided will find guidance. A man who identifies as favored will find favor. Not because the universe plays favorites, but because the world reflects the state. Many years ago, I spoke with a businessman who told me, "I am always too late. Opportunities pass me by." That was his identity. He had built a whole world of too late. So I said, "Tonight, fall asleep in the feeling, I am always on time. I am always in the right place." He laughed. He thought it childish. Yet he tried it. Weeks later, he said to me, almost embarrassed, "It is as though time itself has shifted. I arrive when I should. People call me at just the right moment. I hear of things earlier." Nothing mystical happened to the clock. His state changed. He no longer moved through the day as the one who expects to miss. He moved as the one who expects to meet. And so he met another woman who had suffered repeated disappointments in matters of work, came to me and said, "I never receive recognition." I asked her, "And what do you feel about yourself when you lie down at night?" He said, "I feel invisible." There was her state. So I said, "Tonight, do not sleep as the invisible one. Sleep as the one who is valued." She practiced it, not with vanity, but with the quiet feeling of being seen and appreciated. And soon she found that people began to speak her name, to ask for her opinion, to notice her efforts. Again, the world did not suddenly become fair. She became one who expects recognition, and so she encountered it. Now let me say something that will strike deeply, if you allow it. The world is always conspiring to prove you right about yourself. Whatever you believe you are, the world will arrange evidence, not because the world has an opinion, but because it is formed from your assumptions. If you assume you are unloved, you will interpret everything as rejection. Even kindness will feel like pity. Even silence will feel like abandonment. But if you assume you are loved, you will interpret events differently. You will see love where before you saw danger, and the world in time will reflect that love in tangible forms. If you assume you are poor, you will see expense everywhere, obstacles everywhere. You will feel tension at the thought of a bill. But if you assume you are prosperous, you will see openings, ideas, resources. You will feel calmer. And calmness is not merely pleasant, it is creative. For calmness is the state of one who has. This is why the difference between wanting and assuming is not mere words. It is a difference in being. Wanting keeps you restless, assuming makes you still. And stillness is the secret soil in which the seed of manifestation grows. Now do not imagine that assumption means you must walk about all day pretending. I do not ask you to put on a false smile or speak loudly of wealth when you do not yet see it. That is vanity, and vanity is often a cover for doubt. I ask you for something far simpler and far more powerful. Sleep differently. Things started working, not when I changed the world, but when I changed who I slept as. That sentence contains more truth than many books. For your sleep is the most honest confession you make. By day, you may flatter yourself. You may boast, you may argue, you may attempt to convince others. But as you approach sleep, the masks fall. The deeper feeling rises. And whatever you are in that moment is what you plant. So ask yourself, gently, who have you been sleeping as? Have you been sleeping as the one who fears tomorrow? Then tomorrow will contain fear. Have you been sleeping as the one who feels behind in life? Then life will keep presenting the feeling of being behind. Have you been sleeping as the one who believes nothing works? Then nothing will seem to work, because life must prove you right. But if you begin to sleep as the one who is favored, as the one who is provided for, as the one whose life flows smoothly, as the one for whom things finally work, then the world must begin to reflect that, because the subconscious mind does not create according to what you wish. It creates according to what you accept. This is why I warn you against the habit of pleading. Pleading is a confession of separation. Pleading says, I am here, and the thing I want is far away. And the subconscious, hearing that confession, builds a life that keeps the thing far away. I have known people who prayed for years in this manner. They prayed sincerely. They prayed with tears. They prayed with trembling. And still, their lives did not change. When they came to me, I did not criticize their sincerity. I questioned their state. For sincerity of desire does not overcome the state of lack. You may sincerely desire wealth and sincerely remain poor in consciousness. It is not sincerity that manifests. It is identity. When you assume, you are no longer asking. You are consenting. You are agreeing. You are declaring inwardly, this is what I am now. And then you allow the world to catch up. Now you may ask, how can I assume when the facts contradict it? My friend, facts are not causes. Facts are effects. They are the ripened fruit of previous assumptions. To use present facts as your guide is to remain trapped in the past. This is why you must learn to live from the unseen rather than from the seen. And the easiest place to do this is in the borderland before sleep, where the outer world is fading and the inner world is becoming vivid. In that state, you do not struggle to believe against the senses. The senses are quiet. You simply feel. You simply accept. And once you have accepted, you need not strain. The law does not require strain. It requires fidelity. So let me tell you again the simplest truth I can give. Life does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you assume you already are. If you assume you are the one who always finds a way, you will find ways. If you assume you are the one who is always helped, you will be helped. If you assume you are the one whose life finally works, you will see things begin to work. And once you have tasted it, once you have felt that shift, you will realize that the outer world never held the power you thought it held. The power was always the one sleeping in you, not the body asleep, but the creative self that enters that borderland nightly and speaks the final word. And that final word, whether spoken in fear or in faith, becomes the pattern of your tomorrow. So you may continue to want. Wanting is the beginning, but you must not remain there. You may continue to ask, if you must, but understand that asking keeps you outside the door. To enter, you must assume. An assumption is not hard. It is simply the acceptance of a new identity, most easily done in the quiet, when the mind is soft and the body is heavy, when you are near that sacred threshold. Tonight then, if you will, do not carry desire into sleep as longing. Carry it as fulfillment. Do not carry it as hunger. Carry it as satisfaction. Do not carry it as a request to the world. Carry it as a confession of self. For you do not get what you want. You get what you are. And when you sleep as the one you choose to be, life must in time reflect that choice with perfect obedience. There is a strange innocence in the way most men approach the night. They do not realize they are walking into a chamber that remembers. They treat sleep as though it were only rest, only escape, only a shutting down of the senses. And because they do not know what they are doing, they carry into that sacred darkness the very thing they have begged all day to be freed from. They lie down and say, tomorrow will be better, and yet inside them is the feeling of, it never is. They close their eyes and whisper a few hopeful words, and then, as the heaviness of the body comes on, the old self rises like a familiar guest and takes its place in the bed with them, and they do not notice. They simply drift, and because they drift, they enter sleep as who they have always been. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. Now I do not say this to frighten you. I say it to awaken you, gently, kindly, to the fact that your nights are not neutral. Your nights are creative. They are the womb in which the next day is formed. And if you enter that womb carrying the old identity, the old fears, the old waiting, the old worry, you should not be surprised when you awake to its offspring. So let us speak of the nightly errors that keep people bound to poverty, not merely poverty of coins, but poverty of spirit, poverty of opportunity, poverty of ease. I have watched these errors repeat themselves in countless lives, and I have watched the same lives change the moment those errors were corrected, not by force, not by strain, but by a quiet shift of what they consented to as they fell asleep. The first error is this: falling asleep. Waiting. Waiting seems harmless. It even seems noble. A man says, "I am patient. I am hopeful. I am waiting for my time." But waiting is not patience in the subconscious. Waiting is lack. Waiting is the confession. It is not mine now. Waiting is the inner posture of one who stands outside the door with his hand outstretched, listening for footsteps that may or may not come. Many people do not realize they are waiting because they do not call it waiting. They call it hoping. They call it keeping the faith. They call it trusting. But in their feeling, beneath the words, there is a quiet emptiness that says, "It has not happened." And the subconscious does not obey your fine phrases. It obeys your inner state. I remember a man who came to me after a lecture. He was well dressed, polite, and intelligent. He spoke as though he had read everything and understood much, yet his face carried the weariness of long disappointment. He said, "I listened to your words. I believe the law. And still, I remain where I am. I am always just on the edge of improvement, never in it." So I asked him something simple. "When you lie down at night, what do you feel? Not what do you say. What do you feel?" He looked away for a moment, as though embarrassed by the honesty that was required. Then he said, "I feel as though I am waiting for something to break in my favor." I said, "Then you are falling asleep, waiting. And because you fall asleep waiting, you wake to more waiting. You are planting the seed of not yet. And the harvest of not yet is always more not yet." He protested. "But Neville, surely one must wait. Surely things take time." And I answered him, "Things take time in the world of effects, but they are immediate in the world of cause. If you remain in the state of waiting, you remain in the cause of delay. You are faithful to delay, and life will be faithful back." He wanted to know what to do, and I did not give him a complicated instruction. I did not send him away to labor mentally for hours. I said only, "Tonight, do not go to sleep as the one who waits. Go to sleep as the one who has received. Not frantically, not wildly, but quietly. Let your last feeling be, 'It is done.'" That man returned to me weeks later, and he said something that I have heard in 1,000 different forms from 1,000 different mouths. He said, "Neville, it is peculiar. I did not do anything dramatic. I did not force anything, but I stopped feeling as though I was waiting. I began to fall asleep in the feeling that my affairs were already settled. And then, in ways I cannot fully explain, matters began to move. Of course they moved. They moved because the state had moved. He had stopped planting, not yet. He began planting already, and already has its own harvest. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. Now the second error is this: falling asleep worrying. Worry is one of the most common prayers offered by man, though he does not call it prayer. He calls it thinking ahead. He calls it being responsible. He calls it being careful. But worry is imagination in bondage. It is the creative power turned against itself. It is the gift of God used to build the very thing the heart fears. A man worries over bills, and he thinks he is being practical. A woman worries over the health of someone she loves, and she thinks she is being attentive. A student worries about failure, and he thinks he is preparing himself. But in truth, worry is rehearsing disaster. It is entering the scene of loss again and again, until it becomes familiar, until it feels natural, and then sleep seals it. For sleep does not judge the content of your worry. Sleep receives the feeling of it as your consent. I remember a woman, gentle, sincere, and worn thin by the strain of living. She told me, "Neville, I cannot stop my mind at night. I lie down, and the day begins again. I go over every conversation, every expense, every fear, and I wake tired. She was not merely tired. She was creating fatigue. She was planting tomorrow's burden by rehearsing today's burden as she entered sleep. I asked her, when your mind runs like that at night, what is the feeling beneath it? She said, the feeling is that if I do not worry, something will go wrong. Do you hear it? The belief that worry is protection. The belief that fear is a guard at the gate. And so she kept a guard at the gate, and that guard's name was fear. And fear, standing at the entrance to sleep, stamped every night with its seal. I said to her, my dear, you are using the creative power to produce the very thing you dread. You believe worry is care. It is not care, it is creation, and you have been creating trouble. She wept, because to see this is to see how innocently we have harmed ourselves. And then I said, do not fight your thoughts with violence. That only gives them strength. Replace the mood. Do not try to stop the river. Change the direction of its flow. So I asked her to do something simple. I said, each night, before you drift, take the very thing you worry about and feel it resolved. If it is a bill, feel it paid. If it is a letter, feel it bring good news. If it is a conversation, hear it end kindly. You do not have to battle every thought. You only have to give the subconscious a new ending. At first she doubted she could do it, but she persisted gently. And then she wrote to me, some months later, saying, Neville, I cannot explain it, but my life has softened. Problems that once seemed inevitable no longer arrive. And when something does happen, I meet it with a calm I did not have before. What changed? She stopped falling asleep, worrying. She stopped entering sleep as the one who expects trouble. She began entering sleep as the one who is carried, protected, provided for. And life, obedient, began to reflect protection rather than threat. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. Now the third error is the deepest and the most subtle, falling asleep as the old version of yourself. This one is the great trap. Because a man may correct waiting and he may correct worry and still remain unchanged if he continues to identify with the old self. The old self is not merely a set of circumstances. It is a feeling. It is a name you silently answer to. It is a posture you return to when no one is watching. It is the story you keep telling yourself about who you are and how life treats you. Many people attempt to change their lives while remaining loyal to the old story. They want new outcomes, but they insist on keeping the old identity. They say, I want wealth, but I am not lucky. They say, I want peace, but I have always been anxious. They say, I want things to work, but nothing ever works for me. And then they wonder why the world does not change. But the world cannot change while you continue to be the same cause. I recall a young man, very young, who came to me in a state of despair. He said, Neville, I have tried to change. I have imagined. I have affirmed. I have done everything. But I always return to the same condition. I asked him, what condition is that? He said, the condition of being the one who fails. And then he added, almost under his breath, it is who I am. There was the confession. The identity was not, I have failed. It was, I am a failure. And as long as a man sleeps as a failure, he will wake to failure, even if he wins small victories in between. For the state to which he returns is the state that becomes his world. I said to him, you must stop describing yourself with that name. You must stop returning to that place. The past may have shown you failure, but it has no right to name you. He asked, but how do I stop feeling it? And I answered, you do not stop feeling it by fighting it. You stop feeling it by feeling something else until it becomes natural. You must rehearse success in the only place success is born, in consciousness. And you must fall asleep as the successful man. He looked at me with suspicion, as though I were asking him to lie. But I told him, the only lie is to accept the evidence of the senses as final truth. The senses show you an effect. You are asked to change the cause. That is not lying. It is creating. So I asked him to choose a simple imaginal scene, not long, not complicated. A handshake with a friend saying, "You did it." A letter of acceptance. A small moment that implied success. And I asked him to do something even more important, to feel, as he drifted, that he was already that man, not hoping to become him. Being him. Weeks later, he wrote again. He did not say he had become a millionaire or a famous man overnight. He said something far more significant. "Neville, I feel different. I do not return to the old despair as quickly. I catch myself thinking like a man who expects good." That is the beginning of every transformation. The shift in expectation. The change in what feels natural. And once the inner man changes, the outer man follows, step by step, through a bridge of incidents no one could have arranged. Now let me tell you of a woman, older than the young man, whose struggle was of a different kind. She had been poor for so long that poverty felt like her skin. It was not merely a condition, it was an identity. She came to me and said, "Neville, I cannot imagine wealth. It feels absurd. It feels like putting on a robe meant for another." I did not argue with her. I understood her. For when a state has been worn for years, the new state feels unnatural at first, and the mind confuses unnatural with impossible. So I said, "My dear, you are not required to imagine palaces. You are only required to imagine relief. Imagine the feeling of being safe. Imagine the feeling of being provided for. Imagine a night where you do not count coins and fear the morning." She could imagine relief. She could imagine the shoulders dropping, the breath softening, the quietness that comes when nothing is pressing. And so she began there. Each night she would enter sleep with the gentle feeling, "I am safe. I am provided for. It is taken care of." She told me later, "Neville, it was as though my mind learned a new resting place." That is exactly what happened. Her mind learned a new home. And then, as surely as a man who moves into a better house begins to live differently, she began to act and speak and move through the day with less fear. And then the world reflected that. A relative who had been distant offered help. A position became available that suited her and paid better. Debts that had haunted her were resolved in ways that seemed to her like mercy. She said, "It is as though I have been lifted." And she had lifted out of an identity. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. Now you must understand something about these errors. They are not moral failures. They are habits. They are patterns. They are simply the way men have been taught to approach life. They have been trained to accept appearances as final. They have been trained to rehearse fear as wisdom. They have been trained to think of themselves as fixed creatures at the mercy of circumstance. And because these trainings are old, they rise most strongly at night, when the conscious mind is tired, and the old grooves of feeling become easy to slip into. That is why the moment before sleep is so important. It is the moment when the guard is relaxed and the true state slips in. If you do not choose consciously, you will choose unconsciously. And the unconscious choice is always the old self. This is why I say to you, with all tenderness and all firmness, you must not go to sleep carelessly. You must not enter that chamber as though it were nothing. You must enter as one who knows that sleep is a listener, a receiver, a faithful servant that takes your last feeling and builds your tomorrow from it. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. I have watched men do the strangest thing. They will spend the day trying to be hopeful, trying to be brave, trying to be positive. They will say all the right things. They will encourage others. They will smile, and then, at night, when they are alone, they will drop into their true confession. They will say within themselves, "It won't work." They will feel the familiar dread. They will rehearse tomorrow's problems. And then they will sleep. And the next day, they will wake and say, "You see, it didn't work." But what did they plant? They planted, "It won't work." They planted it as they entered the womb. And the harvest was faithful. Now let me give you another testimony. Not as a list, not as a cold account, but as living proof, as stories you can feel. There was a man of business who came to me, not poor in the sense of having nothing, but poor in the sense of being trapped. He had a modest income, enough to survive, yet his life felt like a narrow hallway. Every month was the same. Every year was the same. He said, "Neville, I feel as though I am moving but never arriving." He had tried new ventures. He had worked longer hours. He had sought advice, but inwardly he remained the man who expected life to be tight. He expected limitation. He expected struggle. And so, no matter what he did, he returned to that state. I asked him, "When you go to sleep, what is the final mood?" He admitted, "I fall asleep thinking, maybe next month." Do you see? Waiting. Not it is, but maybe. I told him, "Stop sleeping in maybe. Sleep in done." He said, "But I cannot say done when it is not done." And I said, "Then you will remain where you are, because you have made the outer world your master. The inner world must be master." So he chose a simple scene. He imagined sitting at his table, opening a letter, and seeing that his income had increased in a way that relieved him. He did not imagine extravagance. He imagined sufficiency. He imagined the feeling of ease, and he repeated it, not with strain, but with gentleness, letting it carry him into sleep. Within a short time, he found himself introduced, naturally, without plotting, to a person who offered him a position of greater responsibility and greater reward. It was not magic. It was not accident. It was a bridge. The bridge formed because his state changed. He stopped sleeping as the one who hopes for maybe next month. He began sleeping as the one who is already established. He told me later, "Neville, it is as though the world finally made room for me." But the world had made room the moment he changed the inner claim of who he was. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. Another, a woman who lived with constant worry over money. Though her husband worked faithfully, she would count and recount. She would plan and plan. She would imagine trouble, not because she wanted trouble, but because she feared being caught unaware. Her home was filled with tension she did not intend to create. One night she said to herself, "I cannot live like this." And she came to me soon after. She said, "Neville, I do not know how to stop my mind." I did not tell her to stop it by force. I told her to redirect it. I said, "Before you sleep, let your final act be the feeling of abundance. Imagine, if only for a moment, that you open your purse or your drawer and you find more than enough. Feel the relief of being safe, and then sleep." She said, "But that feels foolish." I said, "Foolish to whom?" "Foolish to the old self, but the new self must be allowed to be born." She practiced. At first, she could only hold the feeling for seconds, then for minutes. Then it became easier. She found herself waking with less dread. And then, in the most ordinary way, her husband received a better opportunity. A small investment, one they had nearly forgotten, brought a return. A debt that had pressed upon them was resolved. It was not a thunderclap, it was a dawn. And she said something that I will never forget. "Neville, I did not receive money first. I received peace, and then money followed." Yes, because peace is the state of one who has worry, is the state of one who lacks, and life always follows the state. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. Now perhaps you will hear these stories and think, "But I have problems greater than theirs." My friend, the law is not measured by the size of your problem. The law is measured by the clarity of your state. A small seed produces a tree not because it is large, but because it is true to itself. So it is with assumption. The power is not in the scale of your desire. The power is in the fidelity of your identity. The greatest tragedy is that people often do the right thing in the wrong spirit. They will attempt to imagine, but they imagine as the old self trying to escape. They imagine as the fearful one seeking relief. They imagine with the feeling, "I hope this works." And that feeling, "I hope," is still waiting. It is still lack. So I say again, the nightly error is not merely what you think. It is who you are, as you think it. If you fall asleep as a beggar repeating affirmations, you have still fallen asleep as a beggar. If you fall asleep as the anxious one trying to be calm, you have still fallen asleep as the anxious one. If you fall asleep as the old self, reaching for the new self, you have still fallen asleep as the old self. You must fall asleep as the new self, and this is not done by force, it is done by surrender. The moment before sleep is a moment of yielding, and you must yield to the chosen identity. Now let me speak of one more form this error takes, for it is subtle and it destroys many attempts. A man will fall asleep expecting the world to convince him. He says, "I will believe when I see." And he lies down and waits for a sign, waits for a feeling, waits for some sudden certainty to descend upon him. But that again is waiting. That again is placing power outside. The subconscious does not respond to a man who says, "Show me and I will believe." It responds to the man who says, "I believe, and therefore it will be shown." There was a student of mine who wanted a change in his work. He felt trapped. Each night he would lie down and say, "I want a better position." And he would think about it and think about it until he fell asleep, and nothing changed. He came to me and said, "Neville, I cannot make it happen." I asked him, "Do you fall asleep as the man in the better position?" He said, "No, I fall asleep wanting it." I said, "Then you will wake wanting it." And so I told him, "Tonight, do not want. Be. Imagine that you are already in the new work. Feel the desk beneath your hands. Hear someone speak to you with the respect that belongs to that role. Feel the quiet dignity of it. Then sleep." He did it. And he said that something strange happened. He did not feel excited. He felt calm. He felt as though it were already arranged. And within days, an opening appeared that fit him perfectly. Now the world would call that chance. But you and I know it was the law. It was the outward reflection of an inward shift. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. If you have been falling asleep waiting, you have been giving sleep the identity of the one who is still outside. If you have been falling asleep worrying, you have been giving sleep the identity of the one who expects harm. If you have been falling asleep as the old version, you have been giving sleep the identity of the one whose life must repeat. And sleep is faithful. Sleep takes what you give it. It does not argue. It does not correct you. It does not say, "Are you sure?" It simply receives and begins to weave. That is why I speak to you with such gentleness, because I know that many have suffered simply because they did not know. They were not doing evil. They were doing what they had been taught. They were being honest to appearances. They were being realistic. They were rehearsing trouble because they believed it was wisdom. But now you know. And knowing is the beginning of freedom. So tonight, if you will, do not enter sleep unconsciously. Do not drift into it, carrying the old man like a heavy coat. Do not bring waiting into the bed and call it patience. Do not bring worry into the darkness and call it responsibility. Do not bring the old story and call it truth. Bring the new identity quietly, like a lamp carried into a room. You may not yet know every detail of how to do this. You may not yet feel confident. That is quite all right. The law does not require confidence at first. It requires persistence. It requires a willingness to turn again and again toward the feeling of being the one who has already received. If you catch yourself waiting, you return gently to it in. It is done. If you catch yourself worrying, you return gently to it in. It is resolved. If you catch yourself being the old self, you return gently to "I am the new man now." And you do this most importantly at the edge of sleep, because sleep is the great confirmer. Sleep is the seal. Sleep never forgets who you were when you entered it. So let that sentence become for you, not a threat, but a guiding light. Let it remind you, tenderly, each night, choose who you are as you drift. Choose the state. Choose the feeling. Choose the identity. For you are not merely going to bed. You are entering the workshop where tomorrow is built. And if you will enter as the one who is already provided for, already guided, already blessed, already established, then sleep will not forget that either. It will remember you as that man, and the morning, in its own appointed way, will begin to show you the world that matches the one you were when you entered the night. There comes a point in a man's understanding of this law when he realizes that it is not enough to plant a new seed tonight if he continues to water an old weed from yesterday. For most people do not live only from what they desire. They live from what they remember. They live from what they secretly replay. They live from the meaning they have agreed to give the events that have passed through their hands. And so they ask for a new life while still carrying the old life within them. They say, I want to be free, but inside them is the remembered feeling of bondage. They say, I want to prosper, but inside them is the remembered humiliation of lack. They say, I want things to work, but inside them is the remembered sting of failure, kept alive not by the event itself, but by the feeling they have never released. Now I tell you something that, when it first dawned upon me, felt like a miracle greater than any outward change I had ever witnessed. It was not merely that imagination creates the future, it was that imagination can redeem the past. It was the discovery that what you call yesterday is not fixed, not final, not untouchable. It is living clay in the hands of consciousness. And the moment you revise it, you do not merely comfort yourself, you change the seed from which tomorrow must grow. The world believes the past is behind you, like a road you have already walked and can never walk again. But that is not true. The past is not behind you, it is inside you. It lives in you as feeling, as assumption, as expectation. And because it lives in you, it is not finished. It is active. It is a cause, even though you call it an effect. So when I speak of revision, I do not speak of a clever trick, nor a little exercise for the mind. I speak of redemption. I speak of resurrection. I speak of liberty. I speak of a power so merciful, so quiet, and so exact, that it can lift a man out of years of struggle, as though those years were only a dream from which he has awakened. Revision came to me, not as a notion I read in a book, but as a revelation born out of necessity. There were times, as you know, when my own life in the outer world was narrow. I lived in small rooms. I knew the taste of uncertainty, and more than that, I knew something perhaps worse than uncertainty. I knew the feeling of being diminished. There are events that do not simply inconvenience you, they humiliate you, they stamp something upon you, they leave you with a silent agreement. This is what I am. This is how life treats me. And if you do not remove that stamp, you will carry it into the future and call it fate. I remember a night in which I lay down with a heaviness that did not come only from money, but from memory. I had had a conversation in which I felt myself misunderstood and belittled. Nothing dramatic, nothing that the world would call tragic, and yet it left a sting. It left me feeling smaller than myself, as though I had been pushed into a corner and forced to agree with a lesser identity. As I lay there, I began to replay it. I heard the words again. I felt the tightening in my chest again. I was about to fall asleep in that state. And then, like a quiet hand placed upon my shoulder, something within me said, "Do you see what you are doing? You are planting this." And I realized in that moment that if I sleep in the feeling of being diminished, tomorrow will echo it in some form. Not necessarily the same conversation, but the same state. For life does not repeat events, it repeats states. So I did something that felt, at first, almost too simple to be real. I took the scene and I changed it. I returned in imagination to the moment that had wounded me, and I rewrote it as I wished it had been. I did not do it angrily. I did not do it to punish anyone. I did it to free myself. In my mind, I heard a different tone. I heard the other speak kindly. I heard words of respect where there had been dismissiveness. I felt myself stand tall within the scene. I felt the warmth of dignity returning, and I repeated this revised scene gently. Not many hours, not with strain, but until the sting dissolved and was replaced by peace. Then I fell asleep. And what happened the next day was not some magical spectacle, something subtler, and therefore more convincing, occurred. The state had changed. I met the world differently. People responded differently. Circumstances arranged themselves to match the inner correction, and I understood that revision is not a toy. It is a law. The past is not behind you, it is inside you. Now you may say, but Neville, how can changing an imaginal scene alter what happened? The facts remain. My friend, facts are not the power. Feeling is the power. The subconscious does not keep a ledger of facts. It keeps an atmosphere, it keeps the mood you accepted as truth, and it is from that mood that it produces the patterns of your life. If a man has carried for 10 years the feeling, I was rejected, then even if the rejecting event happened once, he will meet rejection again and again because he is loyal to the state. But if that same man revises the event, not by denying it in bitterness, but by redeeming it in consciousness, he removes the feeling of rejection. And when the feeling is removed, the pattern dies. So revision is not about arguing with the world, it is about changing the inner cause. Let me tell you of a woman who carried debt like a chain. Not merely the numbers, but the shame. The shame was heavier than the debt itself. She had borrowed in a time of need, and though she had done nothing immoral, she had accepted a feeling of unworthiness. Each letter that arrived felt like an accusation. Each knock at the door felt like judgment. She came to me and said, Neville, I cannot sleep. I lie down and I see those letters. I hear those demands. I feel trapped. And I said, then you are living in the past each night, and the past is living through you. She did not understand at first. She thought the debt was the cause. She thought the letters were the cause. But the cause was the state of being condemned. So I asked her to revise, not the entire world, not all her years, but one simple scene. The scene of opening a letter. She said, but I open letters every week. Which one do I revise? I replied, revise the feeling. Choose any one that carries the weight. Take the moment you dread and transform it. So that night, as she lay in bed, she imagined herself receiving a letter. She saw her own hands hold it. She felt the familiar fear rise, and then she changed it. In her imagination, the letter opened to reveal words of relief. The account was settled. The matter was resolved. There was no demand, only confirmation that all was taken care of. At first, she could not believe it, but she did not need to believe it with the intellect. She needed only to feel it enough to soothe the wound. She repeated the scene until her body relaxed, until the dread lifted, until the new ending felt natural. Then she slept. She practiced this night after night, not with desperation, but with quiet faithfulness. She revised not only the letters, but the conversations, the moments in which she had felt ashamed, the times she had been spoken to harshly. She rewrote her financial story in consciousness. And then, in a way that seemed to her like mercy, the outer world began to reflect the inner change. A portion of the debt was forgiven through a simple adjustment. Another part was resolved by an unexpected opportunity for better work. And a sum came, small at first, then larger, that allowed her to close accounts she had believed would haunt her for years. But the greatest gift was not the money. It was the end of shame. She said to me, Neville, I feel like a different woman. Yes, because she was. She had resurrected herself from the state of being condemned. The past is not behind you, it is inside you. Let me tell you of another. A man who carried humiliation like a bruise under the skin. He had been dismissed from a position in a manner that wounded his pride. Not only dismissed, but spoken to as though he were insignificant. He walked away with anger in his chest and a story in his mind. Men do not respect me. Life does not favor me. And because he carried that story, life was faithful. He met disrespect again, in different forms, in different places, from different mouths, as though the world were conspiring to remind him of his wound. But the world was not conspiring, the world was reflecting. He came to me and said, Neville, I have imagined success, I have imagined wealth, I have imagined freedom, but nothing holds. I return to bitterness, And I asked him, "Do you fall asleep in bitterness?" He said, "Yes. It returns at night." I said, "Then that is your seed, and the harvest of bitterness is always more bitterness." So I told him to revise the dismissal, not to excuse anyone, not to pretend the world was kind, but to free himself from the stamp it left. That night he lay down and returned in imagination to the office. He saw the room. He heard the tone, he felt the old tightness rise, and then, deliberately, he changed it. He heard the same man speak with respect. He heard words of appreciation. He heard, "You have served well. We value you. We are helping you move to something better." And he felt himself leave the room not as a rejected man, but as a respected one. He felt dignity. He felt calm. He felt the strange relief of a story corrected. He repeated it until the bitterness dissolved. Then he slept. Now, what did that change outwardly? It changed his state. And because it changed his state, he began to meet opportunity differently. He no longer expected disrespect. He no longer carried the posture of a man waiting to be diminished. He walked as one valued. And life, being no respecter of persons, reflected that a new position came. New associations formed. He found himself treated with consideration in places where, before, he had been overlooked. He wrote to me and said, "Neville, it is as though men have changed. Men did not change. The mirror changed, because the one looking into it changed. The past is not behind you. It is inside you." Now, perhaps the most difficult thing for many to revise is failure. Failure is not merely a result. It is an identity people cling to without realizing it. They say, "I failed," and then they live as the one who fails. They meet new attempts with the old fear. They approach new ventures already braced for disappointment. They speak with caution, move with hesitation, and then call it wisdom. But it is not wisdom. It is loyalty to a dead event. You cannot build a new life from an old defeat. I recall a young man, earnest and bright, who had attempted a venture and lost money. He was not ruined, but he was wounded. He had accepted the meaning, "I am not capable. I cannot prosper. I am unlucky." He would say, "I want to try again," but his face would betray him. His body would betray him. His voice would betray him. His sleep would betray him. For at night he would replay the moment of loss. He would see the figures. He would hear the words. He would feel the sinking in his stomach. And each night he would plant it again. So I asked him, "What would you feel if that venture had succeeded?" He said, "I would feel confident. I would feel bold. I would feel as though life favors me." I said, "Then that is what you must take into sleep, not the old scene, the revised one." So he returned to the moment in imagination. He saw himself reading a letter, or receiving a statement, whatever scene had signified loss, and he changed it. He saw the numbers in his favor. He heard congratulations. He felt the quiet satisfaction of a man whose judgment has proven sound. He did not revise it once and forget it. He revised it until the inner atmosphere changed. He revised until he could think of the old venture without pain. He revised until the memory no longer said, "You are foolish," but instead said, "You are capable." Then he slept. And from that revised seed, he began to act differently. Not forced, not theatrical. Naturally, he began to speak with more assurance. He began to consider possibilities he would have dismissed. He met people without the hidden apology in his posture. And then, in a manner that seemed to him like a chain of fortunate coincidences, he found himself in the path of a new opportunity. This time, he did not enter it with fear. He entered it with the state of success, and the result was in harmony with the state. Now, I do not tell these stories to persuade you by spectacle, but to show you the mercy of this law. For revision does not demand perfection. It offers redemption. If you have carried shame, you may revise it into dignity. If you have carried defeat, you may revise it into triumph. If you have carried humiliation, you may revise it into respect. And you do not have to go out into the streets and shout your revision. You do not have to argue with anyone. You do not have to explain yourself, you do it in the inner chamber, where all causes are born. You do it quietly, at night, when the day has loosened its grip. And this is why revision belongs so beautifully with sleep. For sleep is receptive. Sleep is the great receiver. It takes the revised scene and seals it. It takes the new meaning and plants it deep. And then the subconscious, faithful and impartial, begins to build from the revised seed. The past is not behind you, it is inside you. Now let me speak to you plainly of what revision is, so that you do not misunderstand it. Revision is not pretending the past did not happen. It is not an attempt to deceive yourself. It is not a childish refusal to face reality. It is the conscious selection of the state from which you will live. The event itself has no power, except the feeling you continue to draw from it. You revise to change the feeling. When the feeling changes, the state changes. When the state changes, the world changes. That is the order. So if tonight you remember a moment perhaps long ago, when you felt poor, powerless, embarrassed, cast aside, do not let that memory stand as a judge. Do not treat it as a law. Treat it as clay. Return to it gently. Step into it in imagination. And then, with the tenderness of one who is healing, change it. If you once stood at a counter, and your coins were not enough, revise it. Feel your hand open with more than enough. Feel the ease. Hear the clerk speak kindly. Walk away with dignity. If you once received a letter that frightened you, revise it, open it, and read relief. Feel the weight lift. If you once spoke to someone and left the conversation feeling small, revise it. Hear respect. Seal yourself understood. Feel the warmth of being valued. If you once attempted something and failed, revise it. Feel success. Feel the quiet certainty of accomplishment. Do not revise for revenge. Revise for freedom. For revision is freedom. It is not merely altering a scene. It is altering the inner prisoner's sentence. I have called it redemption because it redeems the meaning of your life. It returns to you the power you gave away to yesterday. I have called it resurrection because it brings to life a new man, where an old man seemed dead. It lifts you out of the tomb of memory into the present power of imagination. And when you revise, you are not merely changing an image, you are changing yourself. You are saying, I am not condemned by what happened. You are saying, I am not chained to the old story. You are saying, I choose again. Now many ask me, how far back must I go? Must I revise everything? My answer is simple. Revise what stings. Revise what returns. Revise what still has life in you. Some memories lie dormant. They do not trouble you. But others rise again and again, not because they are important to the world, but because they are seeds you keep watering. Those are the ones to revise. And when you revise them, you may find something marvelous. The memory itself begins to feel different. The sting fades. The shame lifts. And sometimes, in ways you cannot trace, the outer world begins to rearrange itself as though it too had been revised. For life is one. Inner and outer are not two. They are one movement. And when you change the inner cause, the outer must follow. I have seen people revise a relationship and the other returned in kindness. I have seen people revise an insult and the world ceased to offer insult. I have seen people revise a financial wound and money began to flow as though an inner dam had been lifted. Because that is exactly what happens. Revision lifts the dam. A man who carries old pain cannot receive new good easily. He is braced against life. He expects harm. He expects disappointment. He expects humiliation. And so he meets life with a guarded heart. But when he revises, he softens. He opens. He becomes receptive. And in that receptivity, the new state finds a home. The past is not behind you. It is inside you. So tonight, as you listen and the body grows heavier, I want you to see revision not as labor, but as release. You are not being asked to force a new future while dragging an old wound. You are being asked to heal the wound at the root. And the healing is done by choosing a new ending. Think of it as this. Every unpleasant event is like a knot in the thread of your life. You can pull that knot tighter by replaying it with pain, or you can loosen it by revising it with love. And when the knot is loosened, the thread runs smoothly again. Now let me speak to you as though you were lying down this very night, because indeed you may be. And if you are not, remember these words for the night when you will. When you lie down, you do not have to revise the entire day at once. Choose one thing, the one that bothers you most, the one that returns like a ghost, the one that makes your stomach tighten when you think of it. Bring it before you in imagination, softly, as though you are holding it in your hands. Then ask yourself, what would I have wished had happened instead? Not what is likely, not what seems reasonable. What would have relieved you? What would have restored dignity? What would have made you feel safe? What would have made you feel blessed? Then create that. Hear the words you wished you had heard. See the outcome you wished had occurred. Feel the relief. That is the key. And repeat it gently until it feels like the truth. Do not strain. Strain is proof you are still trying to convince yourself. Instead, let it be like rocking a child to sleep. You do not shake the child. You soothe the child. You repeat softly. You persist tenderly. And when the feeling changes, you will know revision has been done. Then fall asleep. For sleep, receiving that revised feeling, will begin to build your tomorrow from it. And this is why revision is so powerful. It does not merely plant a new seed. It removes the old weeds. It purifies the soil. It frees the subconscious from a pattern it has been faithfully reproducing. Many try to imagine wealth while still carrying the feeling of old loss. Many try to imagine love while still carrying the feeling of old rejection. Many try to imagine success while still carrying the feeling of old failure. Revision removes the old feeling, and then the new seed can grow without being choked. The past is not behind you, it is inside you. Now let me say one more thing, for this is important. Revision is not only for great dramatic wounds, it is for the small daily moments that, if left untouched, become tomorrow's atmosphere. A sharp word, a small embarrassment, a moment of doubt, a brief fear. These seem insignificant, but they are seeds. And if you sleep with them, you water them. If you revise them, you uproot them. So you may choose each night to redeem the day, not by denying it, but by selecting what it will mean. You take the day in your hands and you say, "You do not have authority over me. I give you a new meaning." That is sovereignty. That is freedom. And when you live this way, you begin to feel something that those who do not revise rarely know. You begin to feel that you are not at the mercy of life. You are the operant power. You are the one who can take any scene and reshape it in consciousness, and therefore reshape the pattern of your world. Now if, as you listen, a memory has already risen, perhaps something you have carried quietly for years, do not push it away. Do not fear it. It has risen because it wants to be redeemed. It has risen because you are ready to be free. So hold it gently, and in the nights to come, revise it. And as you do, you will discover that the burden you called the past begins to lighten. It begins to lose its grip. It begins to feel distant, not because time has passed, but because the state has changed. You will feel less compelled to repeat the old story. You will find yourself speaking differently, moving differently, expecting differently. And then one day you will look around and realize, in the simplest, quietest way, that life has begun to reflect your freedom. For revision is freedom, it is redemption, it is resurrection, it is the gentle art of rewriting the inner book from which the outer world must read. The past is not behind you, it is inside you. And because it is inside you, it can be changed, not by force, not by argument, but by a new imaginal act, accepted as true and carried into sleep as your final feeling. So as you drift closer to that borderland, remember this: you do not have to carry yesterday into tomorrow. You can redeem it tonight. You can resurrect yourself tonight. You can set yourself free tonight and sleep, faithful and deep, will receive that freedom and begin to weave it into the fabric of your days. There are certain nights in a man's life that do not look important from the outside. No trumpet sounds, no sudden blaze of light breaks through the ceiling. The streets remain the same. The rooms remain small. The world does not stop to announce that a turning has occurred. And yet, within that quiet, within that ordinary night, a decision is made in consciousness that begins to move everything. I have spoken to many through the years, and I have listened to their stories, and I have watched the pattern repeat with a faithfulness that never ceases to astonish me. The pattern is always the same. A man struggles, he tries, he reaches, he prays, he reasons, he plans, he labors. He does all the things that seem sensible in the daytime, and still the same wall stands before him. Then one night, perhaps when he is tired of trying, perhaps when he is weary of being wise, perhaps when the old methods have exhausted themselves, he does something different. Not outwardly, inwardly. He changes the state in which he yields himself to sleep. And that is the night when everything begins. You may think you are listening to a tale, but I tell you that what I am about to describe is not a tale. It is the simplest confession I can make. It is the moment I ceased being a man who merely spoke of the law and became a man who lived it. I was not always calm in my understanding. There was a time when I carried, like many do, a kind of hidden desperation. I could speak beautifully of imagination. I could explain with clarity that consciousness creates. And yet, when I faced certain circumstances, my mind would still reach outward first. It would still attempt to force life with effort. It would still search for the lever in the world of Caesar. And when I could not find that lever, I would feel the familiar tightening in the chest, the old quiet fear that whispers, perhaps this is one of those things you cannot change. That whisper is the voice of the old state. It speaks with the tone of experience. It sounds reasonable. It sounds like wisdom, but it is only habit, dressed in fine clothes. I remember the season of my life when money, in the outer sense, felt like a constant pressure, not because I worshipped it, but because it represented freedom. It represented the ability to move without fear. It represented relief. And I was weary of the feeling of being restricted. I had known poverty. I had known those small rooms where every sound felt amplified, as though the walls themselves were listening. I had known the peculiar humiliation of counting coins, not because the counting itself is shameful, but because of what it implies when you are doing it with dread. I had known the feeling of looking at a bill and feeling as though it were not merely a paper, but a verdict. Now, I do not say this to darken the mood of your listening. I say it because I want you to understand I was not speaking from a pedestal. I was speaking as a man who had sat where you may be sitting now, in that inward state where nothing seems to move, no matter how hard you push. And then there came a night. It was not the most dramatic night of my life. It was not even a night I would have remembered, had it not been for what followed. If you had passed me in the street that day, you would not have said, "There goes a man on the edge of a miracle." You would have seen an ordinary man, perhaps a little tired, perhaps quiet, perhaps carrying the same invisible burdens that so many carry. I returned to my room. The room was modest. The bed was plain. The air carried the faint familiar odor of the city, a mixture of dust and distance, of life moving outside your window while you remain still. The sounds of New York at night were never entirely absent. Even when it seemed quiet, there was always something, a far-off carriage, a murmur of voices, the faint hum of a world that did not care what you were thinking. I sat for a moment before lying down. I remember that, not because it was important, but because it was true. I sat, and I felt the weight of the day, and I felt the old temptation to rehearse the difficulties. You know that temptation. It is almost automatic. The mind begins to review. It begins to list. It begins to explain. It begins to worry. It begins to argue with tomorrow before tomorrow has even come. And as I sat there, something in me became very still. It was not a voice in the ordinary sense. It was not dramatic. It was simply a quiet knowing that rose as though it had been waiting behind my thoughts for years. And the knowing was this: if I go to sleep as the man who lacks, I will wake as the man who lacks. If I go to sleep as the man who is worried, I will wake into reasons to worry. If I go to sleep carrying the day as it was, I will wake into a day that repeats itself. And in that moment, I felt a kind of calm decision form inside me. Not hope, not pleading, decision. I said within myself, very gently, I will not sleep in this old state tonight. Now you must understand what that means. It does not mean I suddenly felt wealthy. It does not mean the outer world suddenly looked different. The room was still the room. The bed was still the bed. The money I did or did not have was still the same number. Nothing had moved outwardly, but inwardly, I withdrew consent from the old identity. That is the true turning. The moment you stop consenting to the state you have been living in. I lay down. I remember the feel of the sheets, simple and cool at first, then warming beneath my body. I remember the way the pillow gave slightly under the weight of my head. I remember the small discomforts of the body settling. And I remember the mind trying, as it always does, to wander back to the familiar story. It would bring up a concern. It would offer me a reason. It would show me a picture of something unfinished. And each time, without anger, without strain, I returned to one simple thing. I chose a single sentence, not a long prayer, not a long speech. One sentence, like a key placed into a lock. The sentence was not clever. It was not poetic. It was simply true to the state I wished to occupy. I said within myself, slowly, it is done. Now do not rush past those words. Many hear them and think they are merely words. But when I said them that night, I did not say them as a man trying to convince himself. I said them as a man choosing an end. It is done. I did not attach it to a particular coin or a particular letter. I attached it to the feeling of relief. I attached it to the feeling of being provided for. I attached it to the sensation of no longer waiting, and then I began to feel what I would feel if it truly were done. Not what I would feel if it might be done someday. Not what I would feel if I could only make it done. What would I feel if it were done now? At first, the feeling was faint, like the first warmth that enters a cold room. But I stayed with it. I did not wrestle the mind. I did not force the body. I simply returned, again and again, to the implication. If it is done, then I am no longer seeking. If it is done, then the burden is no longer mine to carry. If it is done, then I can rest. And so I let myself rest inwardly. The strange thing is this: the body responds to your inner decision more quickly than you think. When the mind truly yields, the muscles soften, the breath lengthens, the jaw unclenches, the shoulders drop without effort. You begin to feel almost as though someone has loosened a cord that was pulled tight all day. As I lay there, repeating softly, "It is done," I noticed that the anxious energy that had been so familiar began to drain away. Not because the world had changed, but because I had stopped feeding it with attention. Then, still in the quiet, I allowed a simple imaginal scene to form. It was not elaborate. It lasted only a few seconds. It implied everything without trying to explain anything. I imagined myself holding a letter in my hand. Not any letter. A letter whose very presence carried the feeling of security. I could feel the paper. I could feel the slight stiffness of it. I could sense the envelope's edge against my fingers. And I imagined opening it. Not with panic. Not with dread. With calm. Inside, I imagined a notice of good fortune. The exact wording did not matter. The meaning mattered. The meaning was, all is well. All is provided. Everything that troubled me is taken care of. And as I held that imagined letter, I felt a wave of relief move through me. Now, relief is a holy feeling. Do not underestimate it. Many chase excitement, thinking excitement is faith. It is not. Excitement often contains strain. Relief contains surrender. Relief is the body's confession that the battle is over. So I returned again and again to that single sensation: the battle is over. I did not try to see the future. I did not try to count the means. I did not try to outline the bridge. I did not bargain with God. I simply accepted, in the only place acceptance matters, that it was done. And as I lay there, something subtle happened. The scene began to feel natural. You may not know what I mean until you have experienced it. When you first imagine a thing you do not yet believe, it feels like effort. It feels like pushing a stone uphill. But if you remain with it gently, without strain, there comes a moment when the scene stops feeling like make-believe and begins to feel like memory. It begins to feel like something that has already happened. And that is the moment the seed is planted. That night, I reached that moment, not with fireworks, with quiet. I remember feeling my eyelids heavy, not from exhaustion alone, but from a sweet surrender. The room seemed to soften. The sounds outside seemed to grow distant, not because they stopped, but because I no longer cared about them. My attention was inward. My interest was inward, and inwardly, I was no longer the man who was waiting. I was the man who had received. And then sleep came. I cannot tell you the exact second, because the state akin to sleep is like slipping into water. You do not always know when your feet leave the ground. One moment you are aware, the next moment you are gone. But what I do know is this: I fell asleep feeling relieved. I fell asleep feeling secure. I fell asleep in possession, not of a coin, but of the state that implies the coin. And in the simplest way I can say it, I fell asleep differently. Nothing changed that night. And yet everything had already changed. When I woke the next morning, I opened my eyes and I saw the same ceiling. I heard the same city. I felt the same air. My circumstances on the surface were untouched. And yet, within me, something had shifted so completely that I would never be the same again. It was not that I woke with laughter. It was not that I woke intoxicated with certainty. It was quieter than that. I woke with a steadiness. The anxious edge was gone. The desperate hunger was gone. In its place was a calm knowing. Not a thought I had to repeat, but a feeling that seemed to sit behind every thought. It is done. Now you may think this is small, but it is the beginning of every miracle. For the world you meet is always the echo of your inner condition. If your inner condition changes, the echo must eventually change. That day, I walked in New York with a different posture. I did not pretend. I did not put on an act. I did not tell myself, be confident. I simply was different, because I had slept as a different man. I looked at faces, and the faces seemed less threatening. I looked at circumstances, and they seemed less final. Even the very pace of my steps changed. I was not rushing with fear of being left behind. I was walking with a quiet assumption that life was already moving in my favor. And because I was in that state, I began to notice things I would have missed before. That is another secret few consider. The state you live in does not only determine what happens to you, it determines what you perceive. It determines what you perceive. It determines what you recognize. It determines what opportunities can even enter your awareness. A man in fear can walk past a door marked open and never see it. A man in confidence sees it and enters without trembling. So that day, without strain, I found myself in conversations that felt different. I was received differently. People seemed warmer. Doors that would have seemed closed did not feel closed. It was as though life had been waiting for me to stop arguing with it, and I tell you, those first subtle changes are often the most convincing, for they cannot be dismissed as chance. They are too fitting. They are too precise. It began with a small thing, a simple piece of good news, a small provision, a kind word from someone who had been indifferent, a slight opening in a situation that had felt fixed. If you are looking only for the grand event, you will miss the bridge. And the bridge is always made of small, ordinary boards. But I noticed them because I was no longer looking with the eyes of desperation. I was looking with the eyes of fulfillment. And as the days unfolded, those small boards formed a path. Opportunities arose that I had not sought with strain. Assistance came in natural ways. Circumstances rearranged themselves with a calm inevitability. as though the world was simply doing what it must do to catch up with the inner decision I had made. Now listen carefully. I am not telling you that I imagined one night and awoke rich the next morning in the outward sense. That is not the point. I am telling you something far more valuable. I am telling you that the moment I truly fell asleep in the end, the pattern of my life changed. From that night onward, I no longer felt I was wrestling the world. I felt the world responding. Things started working for me, not because I learned a better method in the daytime, but because I stopped planting failure at night. I stopped carrying yesterday into sleep. I stopped entering the womb of creation with the seed of worry. I stopped lying down as the man who lacked. And because I stopped, life stopped repeating the old harvest. Nothing changed that night, and yet everything had already changed. You may wonder what precisely I heard while I slept, and I will answer you. Truthfully, I did not hear it as a voice from the ceiling. I did not hear it as thunder. I heard it as the quiet repetition of the state I accepted, like a lullaby the soul sings to itself. It is done. And beneath that sentence was an even deeper feeling. The feeling that I did not have to force anything. I did not have to manage the world. I did not have to command people or beg circumstance. I only had to be faithful to the end. This is why I tell you that the night is not for planning. It is for becoming. You can plan all day and sleep your plans away by returning to fear at night. But if you become at night, life will plan itself around your being. That first night, the feeling was exact, and I can describe it for you now with tenderness, because I want you to recognize it when it comes to you. It was the feeling of taking a deep breath and realizing, for the first time in a long time, that you are safe. It was the feeling of not needing to watch the clock. It was the feeling of your body being allowed to rest, not as a temporary escape, but as a rightful state. It was the feeling of a burden being removed, not by outer effort, but by inner acceptance. And it was astonishingly calm. If you are waiting for a moment of wild excitement, you may miss it. The true moment of creation is often quiet. It comes with a kind of simplicity that the dramatic mind does not respect, but the subconscious respects it. The subconscious responds to what feels natural, what feels settled, what feels done. That night felt done. I did not feel as though I were throwing a request up to the heavens. I felt as though I were closing a book. The matter was finished. And that is why it worked. Nothing changed that night, and yet everything had already changed. Now you may say, but Neville, how did you keep it? How did you remain in that feeling when the day tried to argue? I will tell you something that will help you greatly. When the state is truly accepted in sleep, you do not have to fight all day to keep it. It has already taken root. You may wobble, you may have moments of doubt, but there is a deeper current now, pulling you back to the new identity, because you planted it where identity is formed. It is like turning a ship slightly in the ocean. The waters do not instantly look different, but the direction is different, and over time, everything changes. From that night onward, whenever the old fear would rise, I would not wrestle it. I would simply return to the memory of the feeling I fell asleep in. Not the memory of the scene necessarily. The memory of the relief. I would close my eyes for a brief moment and let the relief return. And the old fear would loosen because it could not live in the same space as the new state. And then at night, I would do it again. Not anxiously. Not like a man begging for a miracle. Like a man returning to his home. Each night, the state deepened. Each night, it became more natural. Each night, I was less impressed by the facts of the day and more loyal to the truth of the night. And the outer world followed. Not because I forced it, because it had to. For the world is yourself pushed out. And when the self changes, the world has no choice. Nothing changed that night. And yet, everything had already changed. I want you to understand too that the night I speak of was not perfect in the eyes of the mind. I did not feel like a saint. I did not feel like a master. I was simply sincere. I was simply tired of repeating the old pattern. Sincerity is powerful. There is a moment when a man becomes sincere enough to drop the old story. Not because he is trying to be spiritual, because he is done suffering, because he is done rehearsing pain, because he is done consenting to lack. That sincerity is like fire. It burns the old garments. That night I was sincere. I did not need to threaten myself into faith. I did not need to shame myself for doubt. I simply chose again. And I tell you this because many who listen to my words believe they must reach some extraordinary height of certainty before they can begin. They think they must feel like giants. They think they must have unbroken faith. But it is not so. You need only be sincere enough to enter sleep as the one you desire to be, even if you do it trembling, even if the first feeling is faint, even if the old habit tries to return. Persist gently until the feeling becomes natural. That is the night creation occurs. Nothing changed that night, and yet everything had already changed. Perhaps you are waiting for your own first night. Perhaps you have tried many nights, and nothing seemed to shift. Listen to me with kindness now. It is not how long you lie in bed. It is not how many words you repeat. It is not how carefully you arrange a scene. It is the inward yielding to the end. It is the moment you stop looking for signs and become the sign. It is the moment you do not merely imagine a thing, but accept it as true in feeling. That acceptance is quiet. It is like a deep exhale. It is like laying down a heavy bag you forgot you were carrying. That is the exact feeling I had that night. And that is why, though nothing changed on the outside, before morning, everything had already changed within. Because the seed was planted, because the state was entered, because I slept as a different man. And from that simple act, a different life began to unfold. Now, as I speak to you, I do not want you to merely admire the story. I want you to recognize yourself in it. You may be in a small room or a large one. You may be young or older. You may have little or much. But if there is one area in your life where nothing seems to work, no matter how hard you try, then you are being invited to do what I did, not to strain harder in the daytime, to surrender differently at night, to stop giving sleep the old identity, to enter that borderland with a new assumption. And when you do, your first night may not look important either. You may wake and see the same ceiling. You may hear the same street. You may hold the same troubles in your hand, on paper. But if you fell asleep in the end, do not be deceived by the morning's appearance. For nothing may have changed, and yet everything has already changed. Because the law has received your word, and the world, though it may move by gentle degrees, must reflect the state you have dared to occupy. That was the moment it started working for me. Not when I argued with life, not when I pleaded, not when I tried to outwit circumstance, but when I lay down, became still, and surrendered to the feeling that the thing was already done. And then, in the most ordinary way, I fell asleep as that man. Nothing changed that night, and yet everything had already changed. Now, my dear friend, do not try to do anything with these words. Do not strain to make them work. Do not sit upright inside your mind as though you were in a lesson. Let this be gentle. Let it be slow. Let it be like a warm hand laid quietly upon the brow. If you are lying down, let the body be where it is. If you are seated, let the shoulders soften and the hands rest easily. There is nothing you must prove to me, nothing you must force, nothing you must accomplish in the next moment. We are not trying to conquer life tonight. We are simply changing the state in which you yield yourself to sleep. Let the day fall away now. Not with struggle, but with permission. You are allowed to set it down. Whatever happened has had its hour. It has no authority in the holy quiet that comes before sleep. You may remember it, yes, but you do not have to carry it. You may acknowledge it, but you do not have to plant it. So be still. Feel the weight of the body. Feel the simple fact of being supported. The bed supports you. The chair supports you. The floor supports the building. The earth supports the city. And underneath all of that, there is something even greater supporting you. Though you have forgotten it at times, you do not have to name it. You only have to feel, For a moment that you are held. Let the jaw release. Let the tongue rest. Let the brow smooth. Let the eyes become quiet behind their lids. And if thoughts come, as they will, do not argue with them. Let them pass as a carriage passes in a street. You do not run after it. You do not climb aboard. You simply let it go by. Now I will speak to you slowly, and you will not repeat with strain. If you repeat, let it be inwardly, as softly as a whisper that no one else can hear. If you do not repeat, simply listen, and let the feeling of the words sink beneath the mind, into that deeper chamber that receives impressions as reality. There is a place in you that is always listening. It is listening now. It is listening even when the outer mind drifts. It is listening when you sleep. And what it hears with feeling, it accepts. So we begin with something simple. Things work for me. Do not argue. Do not reach for evidence. Do not say, but they have not. That is the old state speaking. Tonight you are not consulting the old state. Tonight you are choosing. Things work for me. Let it be a sentence that feels like warmth. Things work for me. Not because I push, not because I plead, but because this is the state I enter. Things work for me. Now allow a small pause inside you. Let the body soften a little more. Life responds to me. Life responds to me. Not to my worry, not to my frantic thinking, not to my old story. Life responds to me, to the state I occupy, to the feeling I consent to as true. Life responds to me. I am supported. Feel the quiet dignity of that. I am supported. Not someday. Not if I earn it. Not if I deserve it. I am supported. Now I am held now. I am carried now. I am supported. Let those words sink down. As they sink, feel the chest soften. Feel the breath become easier. You do not have to control the breath, but you may notice it becoming slower, as though the body itself is hearing good news. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Now I want you to imagine something very ordinary, for ordinary scenes are the easiest for the subconscious to accept. Imagine a small, pleasant home. It may resemble a home you have known, or it may be entirely new. Do not strain to picture it. Let it come as a mood, a suggestion, a place that feels safe, a place that feels quiet, a place where you belong. See a lamp burning softly in that home, not glaring, only gentle. The light rests on a table. Perhaps there is a chair. Perhaps there is a simple rug. Perhaps a shelf with books. Nothing extravagant is required. Only the feeling of comfort and peace. You are in that home. And in that home, there is no urgency. In that home, you are not waiting for a blow to fall. In that home, you are not bracing. You are simply at ease. Feel yourself standing or sitting there with the calm of one who has been cared for. Feel what it is like to be unafraid in your own space. Feel what it is like to belong to a life that does not threaten you. Now in that imaginal home, you hear a knock at the door. Not a harsh knock, a gentle one. And you know without the slightest doubt that this knock brings good. You walk to the door calmly. You do not rush. You do not tremble. You open it. Someone stands there with a letter in their hand. A letter. Simple paper. But it carries a feeling. It carries relief. It carries the end of a burden. It carries the settling of a matter that has weighed upon you. They hand it to you with a quiet smile, as though this were natural. You take it. Feel the paper between your fingers. Feel its slight stiffness. Feel the edge of the envelope. And as you hold it, you think, very calmly, yes, this is for me. You open it slowly. Inside is the message you would love to receive. The exact words do not matter. The meaning is enough. The meaning is this: everything is handled. Everything is arranged. All is well. And as you read it, you feel something in the body let go. That letting go is the sign. Hold that feeling. Now let the scene fade slightly and return to my voice. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Again softly. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. You may notice now that your mind is becoming quieter. If it is not, that is all right. We do not fight it. We simply keep giving it a better meal than worry. We keep feeding it a new identity, gently, until the old habits grow weak from disuse. Now imagine for a moment that you are having a conversation with someone who cares for you, someone whose presence feels safe. It may be a friend, a family member, or simply a kind person. You are not speaking of struggle in this conversation. You are not rehearsing hardship. You are speaking from a different place. They look at you, and they say, with sincere warmth, "It seems things have begun to turn in your favor." You hear it, and you do not protest. You do not correct them with the old story. You do not say, "No, you do not understand." You simply receive it. You nod gently, and you say, "Yes, things are working for me." Feel how it feels to say that without irony. Feel how it feels to say it as a fact. Things are working for me, and the other person smiles, as though they expected nothing else. As though this is exactly how life treats you now. Let that smile be real in your feeling. Now return again. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. There is a softness that comes when you stop defending the old identity. Let that softness come now. Let the shoulders drop as though you no longer carry a pack. Let the hands unclench as though you no longer have to hold life tightly. Now very gently, I will slow the words even more. Things work for me. Let that sentence stretch out like a calm river moving steadily. Things work for me. There is no strain in it. There is no pleading in it. It is not a shout. It is a quiet knowing. Life responds to me. Life responds to me. Life responds to me. Not to my fear, not to the gossip of the day, not to the stern face of appearances. Life responds to me, to what I accept as true within myself. I am supported. I am supported. Let the mind sink into those words. Let them become like a lullaby. You do not have to remember, because the heart remembers it for you. Now imagine, again, the home. Only this time, you are preparing for sleep in that home, as one who is at peace. You draw back the covers. You sit on the edge of the bed. You feel the softness. You feel the simple comfort. And you realize something: you are not going to sleep to escape life. You are going to sleep to create from the end. You lie down. As you lie down in that imaginal home, you feel your body heavy in the most pleasant way. Heavy as a stone that rests at the bottom of a calm lake. Nothing pulls you. Nothing pushes you. You are simply resting. And in that resting, you hear yourself say, softly, "Things work for me." You do not say it to convince. You say it because it is who you are now. It is your name tonight. It is your identity as you cross into sleep. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Now let the words come again, but simpler still. It works out. It works out. Everything works out for me. Feel the ease of that. Everything works out for me. Not because the world is kind by chance, because I occupy the state in which kindness is natural. Everything works out for me. Now you may have lived a long time hearing the opposite sentence in your own mind. You may have repeated, unconsciously, "Nothing works." You may have said, "It never turns." You may have believed, "I always struggle." Tonight we do not fight those sentences. We simply replace them with a new one and persist gently until the new one becomes the only one. So again, everything works out for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. And now I will give you a picture, simple and sweet. Imagine you wake in the morning and you feel light. Not because you received some dramatic news, but because you feel inwardly secure. You rise from the bed. You wash your face. You look out the window, and the day looks the same. And yet you feel different. You feel as though the day is friendly to you. You feel as though unseen hands have already arranged it. And you think, without effort, things work for me. Then during that day, you receive another letter, or you receive a message through a friend, or you are offered a kindness, or you notice an opening you would not have seen before, and you smile to yourself, not with surprise, but with recognition. Of course, because things work for me. Let this feeling of course come now. The of course is the secret. The of course is the subconscious. Accepting something as natural. So again, softly. Of course things work for me. Of course life responds to me. Of course I am supported. Let the body become heavier. Let the mind become softer. If your thoughts begin to drift, let them drift. Let my voice remain like a gentle lantern in the room, but you do not have to stare at it. You can let your eyes close more deeply. Now imagine a scene of peace, a simple scene. You are sitting at a small table. On the table is a cup. Perhaps there is tea, perhaps water. It does not matter. You hold the cup and you feel the warmth in your hands, or you feel the coolness. Either way, you feel present. You sip slowly, and as you sip, you feel peace spreading through you. Not the peace that comes after you solve every problem, the peace that comes before the solution appears, the peace that is the cause. You sit there and you think, I am supported. And the very act of thinking, it is like laying your head against a pillow. I am supported. Let the heart accept that. Let it stop negotiating. I am supported. Now I want you to imagine a different conversation. A conversation that implies a new life. Someone says to you, you seem changed, and you answer gently, yes. I have been sleeping differently. They ask, what do you mean? And you smile softly. And you say, I go to sleep as the one who is already supported. Feel how that feels. Feel the dignity of it. Feel the quiet authority. Not arrogance. Not pride. Authority. Because you are no longer a victim of the day. You are the one who enters the night with a chosen state. Now I will speak certain phrases slowly. Let them move through you like a slow tide. If you wish, you may allow them to repeat inwardly. If you do not, simply let them wash over you. Things work for me. Things work for me. Things work for me. Life responds to me. Life responds to me. Life responds to me. Life responds to me. I am supported. I am supported. Now let the phrases grow even simpler. It is working. It is working. It is working. All is well. All is well. All is well. I am safe. I am safe. I am safe. Do you feel the body relaxing as these words come? Let it happen. Do not check yourself. Do not measure. Simply allow the relaxation to be there. Now if a worry appears, treat it like a small child knocking at the door. You do not throw it out harshly. You do not invite it to sit at the table and talk all night. You simply say, not now, and you return to the new state. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Now imagine that you are walking through a familiar street. It may be a street you know, or a street your mind creates. The details do not matter. What matters is how you walk. You are walking without the weight of dread. Your steps are steady. Your shoulders are relaxed. You are not scanning the world for danger. You are moving as one who is guided. As you walk, you pass a shop window and you see your reflection faintly in the glass. And you notice something. You look like someone for whom life works. You look like someone supported. And you smile slightly because you recognize yourself. That recognition is the key. Now let the street fade. Return to the bed. Return to the weight of your body. Return to the softness. And let the words come again, like slow bells in the distance. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Now imagine a letter again. But this time it is not a letter of money, not a letter of papers, not a letter of outward things. It is a letter of assurance. It says, in simple language, you are cared for, you are not alone, you are not forgotten. Your life is moving into harmony. You read it, and you feel the truth of it. You fold it carefully. You place it in a drawer, not because you fear losing it, because you are keeping it like a treasure. Then you lie down again, and you fall asleep with the feeling of being cared for. That is all. And yet, that is everything. Now I will slow further. Let the pauses be long. Let your mind drift. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Let those words become fewer now, as though you are sinking below the surface of thought. Working, responding, supported, working, responding, supported. You may not even repeat them. You may simply feel them. Now imagine a home again, but not a new home. A home that feels like it has always been yours. You walk through its rooms. You touch the wall lightly. You open a cabinet. Everything is in order. There is no sense of panic. There is no sense of lack. You feel a gentle pride, not the pride of showing off, but the pride of peace, the pride of a life that is settled. You sit, you rest, you breathe, and you think, life responds to me. You think, things work for me. You think, I am supported. Then you allow your eyes to close in that home, and sleep comes like a friend. Now let me speak of peace once more, for peace is the truest sign that the state has been accepted. Peace does not mean you have all the evidence. Peace means you have accepted the end. Peace means you have stopped arguing with life. Peace means you have planted a seed and you have ceased digging it up to see if it is growing. So let peace come now. Peace in the brow, peace in the throat, peace in the chest, peace in the belly, peace in the hands, peace in the legs, peace in the whole body. And with that peace, let this be whispered inwardly, as softly as you can imagine. Things work for me. Now again, things work for me. Now again, perhaps only as a feeling. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Now I will guide you into one final imaginal scene, and then I will let my words become fewer, so that sleep may take you easily. Imagine that you have received good news, not shouted from rooftops, not dramatic, simple good news. You hold it in your hand, you read it once, and you feel relief. You read it again, and you feel gratitude. You read it a third time, and you feel calm certainty. Then you put it down, and you realize you no longer need to read it, because it has become you. That is the way it is with these words tonight. You hear them, you feel them, and then you become them. So again, softly, things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Now if your mind is wandering, let it wander. Let it drift into sleep. You do not have to hold on to me. You do not have to stay awake. The work is done when the feeling is accepted. So I will begin to repeat the phrases more gently now, with more space between them. Like waves that come and go. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. All is well. All is well. All is well. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. Now let your body sink deeper. Let your breath become quiet. Let your mind be like a feather resting on water. If sleep comes, let it come. If you remain half aware, let it be gentle. You are entering the state in which the subconscious receives the new identity without resistance. So again, like a lullaby, things work for me. Things work for me. Life responds to me. Life responds to me. Life responds to me. I am supported. I am supported. Now imagine only one thing. A quiet smile inside you. Not forced, not performed. A quiet smile that means, yes, it is working. Hold that smile for a moment. Then let it go and drift. Working, responding, supported, working, responding, supported, supported. And now my voice becomes softer. The words become fewer. You may follow them if you wish. You may let them pass through you as you sleep. But know this, you are not planting worry tonight. You are planting a new state, and the morning in its own time must answer. Things work for me. Life responds to me. I am supported. All is well. All is well. All is well. And so, gently, very gently, you go to sleep as the one for whom things work. You go to sleep as the one to whom life responds. You go to sleep as the one who is supported. And that is enough. Few have stayed with me all the way to this quiet edge of the night. Most turn away when the world grows still, because stillness asks for faith. But you remained. And because you remained, you now know what so few ever learn. You now know that the day does not create, it only reflects. You now know that effort without a change of state becomes a weary circle. And you now know the simple hidden truth The night receives you exactly as you enter it, so do not make this a single evening and then forget. Return to it. Come back and listen again when the day has tried to name you something smaller. Let these words be your companion until the feeling becomes your nature. If you wish to leave a comment, let it be simple. Only a line, only a quiet testimony. So another who is tired may find the same door you found tonight. And if this has touched you, return again, not to be entertained, but to be changed. Now I will not stir you. I will not pull you back into the noise. I will leave you with the only sentence that matters, spoken softly, like a lullaby you can carry into sleep. Things finally worked, because I slept as the one they worked for.